Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
I come from a tradition of women maroons, cimarrones, who didn't just try to escape from oppression, but were totally mind, body, spirit committed to resisting and committed to winning. Whether was Nanny in Jamaica, who fought against the enslavers, whether it was Harriet Tubman, who helped to free more than 700 slaves. I think I come from a very strong history, and I simply wanted to live on this planet and to continue that tradition and to try in my little way to make my ancestors proud.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, June 12th, 2015. So I have been told. This is our 6th study session on the autobiography of Assata Shakur. We are picking up on chapter 13. That was Assata Shakur that you heard at the beginning of the program. That is from her documentary, Eyes on the Rainbow. Full documentary is available online. You can check it out. Great notes, great observations. Should supplement a lot of what you have heard over the past few weeks with the text. Again, before we get started, we are fundraising for the summer of 2015. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Listener supported, counter racist radio. PayPal is in the top right corner. If you are not into PayPal, drop us an email. We will get you a mailing address if you would like to contribute to the broadcast. Big thanks to all the folks who have contributed down through the years and kept us on the air. I hope the program has been and continues to be worthy of your time and energy. With that, we will get started. Assata Shakur's autobiography, again, chapter 13, Context of White Supremacy.
Chapter 13. I am at school when I hear about it. Electric shocks are zooming down my back the way they do when I am about to go temporarily insane. On the train, headed uptown, I am ready to riot. I am having daymares on the subway, imagining myself with a long knife slashing slits in white sheets. Ku Klux Klan blood is spilling. You want to look like a ghost? You want to look like a ghost? My mind keeps chanting. You want to look like a ghost? Well, I'll make you one. Sitting on the subway, bloody fantasies. I look out of my daymare. Nobody is moving. Everybody screams. Everybody has a frozen face. The train is slowing down. Everybody is tensely looking at the door. 125th Street. I am going to a riot. I want to kill someone. Martin Luther King has been murdered. The street wakes me up. There is no blood yet. Everybody is getting into position. The wind is blowing rumors. The people are waiting. The streets are rumbling. The tanks are coming. The natives are restless. The tanks will quiet the natives. The tanks are coming. I feel absurd and impotent. Who am I going to attack? Where is a George Lincoln Rockwell? I am ready to kill him. He will get a chance to utter exactly 2 syllables before I cut him off. He isn't there. Only the rumors and the rumble of the tanks and the waiting. The store windows are filled with shit. You can't exchange Martin Luther King for shit in the store window. Smashing windows will do me no good. I am beyond that. I want blood. The tanks are waiting to crush the resistance, squelch the disturbance. It crosses my mind. I want to win. I don't want to rebel. I want to win. The revolution will not be televised on the 6 o'clock news. I have to get myself ready. Revolution. The word has me going. I am back on the subway. Nobody is looking at anybody. I think I have my period. Sweat is rolling down my legs. I go home. My mother is glad to see me. She knows that I am half crazy. The television is wet with crocodile tears. Rebellion, rebellious children, temper tantrums, rebellion, revolution. I like the word. The Grim Reapers are abuzz. Reports about the natives. They are excited. This is the stuff that news is made of. We are looking at each other. Impassioned speeches sizzle on their tongues, causing sour ashes to fall from our mouths. We are just sitting there. I am thinking about the revolution, the tonic, abstract, revolution. I am tired of watching us lose. They kill our leaders, then they kill us for protesting. Protest, protest, revolution. If it exists, I want to find it. Bulletins, more bulletins. I'm tired of bulletins. I want bullets. While I was going to CCNY after I graduated from Manhattan Community College, I decided to get married. My husband was politically conscious, intelligent, and decent, and our affair was frantic, high-pitched, and charged with emotion. Somehow, I believe that our shared commitment to the Black liberation struggle would result in a marriage made in heaven. I spent most of my time at school, meetings, or demonstrations, and whenever I was at home, my head was usually stuck in some book. It was unthinkable to allow more than 5 minutes on mundane things like keeping house or washing dishes. To complicate matters, my husband's ideas about marriage stemmed mostly from his parents' life, where his mother was the homemaker and his father was the breadwinner. Spaghetti was about the only thing I could cook, and he was profoundly shocked to learn I had none of his mother's domestic skills. After a while, it became clear to me that I was about as ready to be married as I was to grow wings and fly. So after a confused and unhappy year, we decided we made much better friends than marriage partners and called it quits. I decided to go to California. It was becoming increasingly clear to me that although it was important for students to participate in the struggle, no revolution had ever been won by students alone. Struggling around school issues had narrowed my perspective, and I was getting bogged down. I wanted to expand that struggle to the Black community. At that time, California, especially the Bay Area, was where everything was happening. Some of my favorite professors were going out west for the summer, and they offered to hook me up with a place to stay. As usual, I was flat broke, but a good friend gave me the money to make the trip, with a little spending change thrown in. My friends found a place for me in Berkeley, the most radical, progressive place I have ever been. Revolutionary posters were plastered all over the walls, along with people's murals. The fronts of banks and other official buildings were bricked up as a result of the demonstrations and street fighting that followed the People's Park struggles. Red Stars and Mao's Red Book were sold on street corners, and food cooperatives sold health food at cheap prices. People's collectives were dedicated to surviving, struggling, and teaching. I was impressed with the kinds of informal solutions they had cooked up to deal with the problems they had faced, and I enrolled in the practical skills classes they gave, printing and laying out, first aid, etc. There were books and pamphlets in the San Francisco and Berkeley bookstores I had never seen in New York, and for the first time I read the theory of urban guerrilla warfare, as outlined by Che Guevara, Carlos Marighella, and the Tupamaros. I had been more aware of imperialism in Vietnam or Cambodia, and the extent of U.S. imperialism in South and Central America surprised me. The U.S. government had invaded more than 15 countries there, not once or twice, but in some cases more than 10 times, and the guerrilla movements were waging armed struggle in most of them. Reading about guerrilla warfare in South America and Vietnam was one thing, but thinking in terms of guerrilla war inside the U.S. was another. Back then, people used the word revolution just because it sounded hip. Half the time, what they were really talking about was change or some kind of vague progress. Some meant a separate black nation, and others dealt with black revolution as part of an overall revolution waged by whites, Hispanics, Orientals, Native Americans, and blacks. Malcolm said it meant bloodshed and land. To me, the revolutionary struggle of black people had to be against racism, capitalism, imperialism, and sexism, and for real freedom under a socialist government. But the reality of achieving it seemed a long way off. In Berkeley and San Francisco, the revolution didn't seem too far away. A lot of white radicals, hippies, Chicanos, blacks, and Asians were ready to get down. But I hadn't forgotten the hard hats and the rednecks and the Bible Belt and the so-called Middle Americans who had elected Nixon. I couldn't imagine the new left talking to those people, much less organizing them and changing their minds. I decided the only way I would come up with some answers was to keep studying and struggling. I didn't know how half of what I was studying would fit in, but I figured it would all come in handy someday. I read about guerrilla warfare and clandestine struggle without having the faintest idea that one day I would go underground. It's kind of funny when I think about it, because reading all that stuff probably has saved my life a million times. As part of my first aid skills class, I worked as an assistant to a doctor who volunteered once a week at Alcatraz. At the time, Alcatraz had been taken over by Native Americans who were protesting against a long series of broken treaties, genocidal policies, and racist exploitation. Alcatraz symbolized the strength and dignity of Indian people, as well as their resolve to fight to preserve their cultural traditions. I enjoyed everything about going there, except the trip. The doctor was a motorcycle fanatic who insisted on zooming across the Golden Gate Bridge on that thing, with me hanging on for dear life. Once on the other side, we would jump into a rickety little boat with water in the bottom and limp across the bay to the island. By the time we got there, I felt as if I had done a day's work. The first thing that hit me was the spirit of the people. I felt the tremendous pride, tremendous determination, and tremendous calm from the time I landed on the island until the time I left. They were Native Americans from all over America, including Canada, from different tribes and backgrounds. They were young and old. Little babies wiggled in their mother's arms, and one old man who had spent many years in Alcatraz prison said that when he arrived on the island, he had taken a sledgehammer and reduced the cell he had once been locked in to rubble. The prison, one of the most infamous and sadistic ever to exist, loomed in the background. There were many different Indian nations, each with its own rich culture, religious traditions, history, and folklore. Everybody was into learning and teaching each other their own history and culture. It was a surprise to find out how many Native Americans had been raised in cities and knew nothing about who they were. In that respect, they were very similar to black people. Most of them were from the West Coast, and so I told them about the Indian Museum and the Museum of Natural History in New York. Suddenly, I stopped short. I wondered, how would I feel going into some museum and seeing the houses and stolen artifacts of my people stuck away in some exhibition hall? As I spoke, I realized that most of the history I had been taught about the Indians was probably lies invented by the white man. It wasn't until later, for instance, that I learned that scalping was an old European custom. In the 1700s, the state of Massachusetts was paying the equivalent of $60 for a scalp, and Pennsylvania paid $134. It wasn't until more than 100 years later, in response to the massive genocide at the hands of whites, that the Indians themselves started scalping. None of the little museum exhibits featuring teepees and feather headdresses had ever mentioned how men, women, and children were mowed down at Wounded Knee, or how the U.S. Army had purposely given the Indians smallpox-infected blankets. As I listened to those sisters and brothers at Alcatraz, I realized that the true history of any oppressed people is impossible to find in history books. I will always be grateful for having had the opportunity to visit Alcatraz. I will never forget the quiet confidence of the Indians as they went about their daily lives calmly, even though they were under the constant threat of invasion by the FBI and the U.S. military. They didn't fit into any of my preconceived notions or the stereotyped images shown on TV and in movies. They were really open with me, and after a while, we talked about the struggle in general. They had many of the same problems we had. Education, organizing the people to struggle, and raising consciousness. They damn sure had the same enemy, and they were doing as bad as we were, if not worse. They told me to check out Akwesasne when I returned to New York. It was a territory they had liberated on the border between New York and Canada. I told them if they ever came to New York, they should visit me and check out Harlem. Sure, when are you going to liberate it? They asked. There were a million groups in the Bay Area I wanted to check out. There was so much activity, I would have to spend 28 hours a day just to keep up with it all. Someone I was studying with arranged for me to hook up with the Brown Berets, a Chicano group that had been started recently in California and Texas. It was a brief meeting, since the brother with whom I had the appointment had to be on the move. He ran down to me some of the conditions they were dealing with and some of the work they were doing. I had always thought of the Chicano movement as a rural rather than an urban one. Most of the information we had received was about the Chicano farm worker struggle and people like Cesar Chavez fighting to organize them and abolish the unbearable living conditions and slave wages they were forced to work for. I was not aware that Chicanos in the city were fighting against unemployment, police brutality, and inferior schools, just like black people. In the same way that the Black Panther Party was trying to organize and politicize the street gangs in Chicago, the Brown Berets wanted to politicize Chicano street gangs in Los Angeles. The brother also told me that they had been doing a lot of work around the Los Siete de las Razas, 7 Chicano brothers, who had been accused of killing a San Francisco policeman. They were later acquitted. I wanted to rap some more about this case because I was seeing the same pattern everywhere. Sisters and brothers being locked up all over the country, accused of killing pigs or of conspiring to. The brother had to run, though. We promised that we would hook up again, but it never happened. Next, I wanted to check out the Red Guard, a group of young revolutionary brothers and sisters who were struggling in Chinatown, San Francisco. I was especially anxious to meet up with them because it was so hard to get information about them back east. The West Coast has the largest Asian population in the country, and I really wanted to get a good idea about what was going on in the Asian communities. A lot of people think Asians do not experience racism, that they are professionals and business owners, unaware that many are poor and oppressed. Finding the Red Guard was not at all easy. Half the people I ran into had never heard of them, and the other half only had a minimal knowledge of who they were and what they were all about. Someone gave me an address, and since I didn't have the faintest idea where it was, I got a brother to drive me over to Chinatown to look for their headquarters. We ended up getting lost and never did find the address. Instead, we ended up eating at a Chinese restaurant and getting into a big debate. He couldn't understand why a black woman wanted to hook up with Chinese revolutionaries in the first place. Ain't nobody gonna free black folks but black folks. Those Chinese don't give a damn about you and me. All they care about is their own people and what's going on in China. I told him that I thought there were a whole lot of us in the same predicament, and that the only way we were going to get out of it was to come together and break the chains. The brother looked at me as if I was spouting empty rhetoric. Some of the laws of revolution are so simple they seem impossible. People think that in order for something to work, it has to be complicated, but a lot of times the opposite is true. We usually reach success by putting simple truths that we know into practice. The basis of any struggle is people coming together to fight against a common enemy. When I finally did get around to meeting some brothers from the Red Guard, it was quite by accident, and somewhat embarrassing. I was hanging out in the park with a sister and some brothers from the Black Students Union. We were exchanging experiences, talking politics, and smoking reefer. The day was blue and beautiful, and we just sat there lazing in the sun without a care in the world, listening to some rock music that was playing in the background. I had bought a whole pile of leaflets and newspapers from New York to give them. Everybody was feeling laid back and mellow, when all of a sudden a bunch of pigs descended on a group of hippies and proceeded to beat them mercilessly, kicking them and hitting them with clubs. We were all so high, we just sat there watching like it was a movie or something. By the time we got our voices together to cry out and protest, pigs were carrying the hippies off. 2 Asian brothers came up to us and pointed to the newspapers. "You better get rid of those before the pigs see them," one said. "More are on the way. If you got any grass on you, you'd better get out of here fast." We were a picture of confusion, stuffing sheets of paper under shirts and into pocketbooks. The Asian brother led our half-day's procession out of the park. "You need a lift?" "Yeah, that's cool." "To where?" "Oh, anywhere from here," one of us answered. We were too high to make any decisions. We piled into a rickety-looking Jeep. They told us they would drive us over to Shattuck Street and drop us off. As we were driving, everybody started to talk about the pigs beating up on the hippies. The image was burning in everyone's mind. "That was a trip," drawled one of the BSU brothers. "Did you see those pigs? I thought they were gonna kill those dudes." I was still high, feeling too stunned and eerie to talk. "That's why we need a revolution," the sister was saying. "They just think they can do anything they want to." "What started that shit?" somebody asked the Asian brothers. "It was some hassle about some ID or something. They just wanted to hassle somebody. You're lucky they didn't see you first." We were all silent for a minute, imagining ourselves being beaten and carted off to jail. It's a good thing they didn't see those leaflets, the other Asian brother said. They would have hassled you for sure. The sister, who was obviously angry, got off into a political rap. Everybody kind of jumped into the conversation, talking about the situation in the black community, the black student struggle, and the overall piggishness of America. Everybody was into the rap, all of us presenting ourselves as political activists and revolutionaries. Are you guys in the movement? One of the Asian brothers asked us. Everybody jumped at the opportunity to say yes, giving credentials and naming organizations. Right on, they said. They told us they were Red Guard cadre, and that they were having some kind of forum on the revolution in China. In my tongue-tied, confused state of marijuana intoxication, I tried to communicate to them that I had been trying to get in touch with their organization to check it out. The brother who had been doing most of the talking reached down under the seat and handed me a leaflet, which had the date and time of the forum. Make sure you come and check us out, he said. Put this somewhere where you won't lose it, making direct reference to my confused, disjointed state of consciousness. You guys should really be careful with that grass, especially when you've got leaflets or newspapers on you. A lot of good comrades have been busted like that. Yeah, said the other one. You've got to be alert to deal with this situation. You've got to be disciplined and ready to deal with the enemy at all times. The Red Guard brothers dropped us off, and we thanked them and said goodbyes amid a hail of right-ons and power to the people. Carefully avoiding each other's eyes, we wandered aimlessly, looking for some place where we could plop down and get our heads together. I was feeling guilty and stupid, silly, and politically backward. I was embarrassed to be bumbling down the street in the middle of the day, not in full control of my faculties, too high to deal with the reality, much less change it. I wondered what the brothers from the Red Guard had thought of us, sitting there in a stupor, having to be virtually led out of the park. It was obvious my stuff was raggedy, and that I needed to get my act together. If I wanted to call myself a revolutionary, I was going to have to earn the title. I had heard somebody say that revolutionaries get high on revolution, and that it was the best high in the world. I'm going to check out that high, I said aloud. Huh? What did you say? Nothing, I answered. I was just talking aloud. Uh-oh, somebody said. I can dig it. We stopped at a coffee shop and had some tea. Everybody looked sheepish and lost in their own thoughts. Finally, we waved our goodbyes and made our separate ways. I walked back to where I was staying, wondering what I was going to have to do to become who I needed to become. Revolution is about change, and the first place the change begins is in yourself. The most important organization on my list to check out was the Black Panther Party headquarters in Oakland. I had a whole lot of respect for the party and had been heavily influenced by it, as had almost everyone around my age that I knew. Every time we heard about Huey Newton and Bobby Seale standing up to the power structure, we slapped 5 and said, yeah. As far as I was concerned, the Panthers were bad. The party was more than bad. It was bodacious. The sheer audacity of walking onto the California Senate floor with rifles, demanding that black people have the right to bear arms and the right to self-defense, made me sit back and take a long look at them. And the more political I became, the more I appreciated them. Panthers didn't try to sound all intellectual, talking about the national bourgeoisie, the military-industrial complex, the reactionary ruling class. They simply called a pig a pig. They didn't refer to the repressive domestic army or the state repressive apparatus. They called the racist police pigs and racist dogs. One of the most important things the party did was to make it really clear who the enemy was. Not the white people, but the capitalistic, imperialistic oppressors. They took the black liberation struggle out of a national context and put it in an international context. The party supported revolutionary struggles and governments all over the world and insisted the U.S. get out of Africa, out of Asia, out of Latin America, and out of the ghetto too. I had gotten to know some of the Panthers in New York when they spoke at the lectures we invited them to at Manhattan Community College. I made it my business to drop by some of the New York Black Panther Party offices and offered to help them with this or that, whatever needed to be done. I was happy to do it. I barely opened my mouth. I just looked, listened, and worked. Some of the comrades would ask why I didn't join. I probably will. Someday, I'd always answer. When I'd heard on the radio that the New York Panthers had been busted, I was furious. The so-called conspiracy charges were so stupid that even a fool could see through them. The police actually had the audacity to charge them with plotting to blow up the flowers in the botanical garden. All the 21 were some of the baddest, most politically educated sisters and brothers in the party. It was an insult. I thought about joining the party right then, but I had some other things I wanted to do, and I needed a low profile in order to do them. As much as I dug the party, I also had some real differences with its style of work. As I opened the front gate of the Oakland headquarters, I felt just as nervous about going inside as I did about the Doberman pinschers running around the yard. A brother opened the door, and I nervously blurted out that I was from New York and had come to check out the party. He acted like he was glad to see me, and brought me into a room to meet some of the other Panthers. A group of sisters and brothers were sitting around the room, laughing and talking. They greeted me casually, passing over a chair for me to sit in. Artie Seal was there, and I had to control myself to keep from gawking at her. I wondered how she felt with her husband in jail, being railroaded and bound and gagged in court. I recognized the names of others. It was strange to be there in a room with those people. It was like sitting down on the pages of a history book. They asked me about New York, and I told them what was happening with the Black Students Union at Manhattan Community College, CCNY, and the Black student movement in general, the anti-war movement, Black construction workers, and whatever other work I was involved in at the time. I told them I had done some work for the New York Panthers and ran off a list of the ones I knew. Somebody asked me why I had never joined the party. Half stammering, I told them I had thought about it but had decided not to. Why? Everybody wanted to know. It was hard for me to say it because I felt so much love and respect for the sisters and brothers seated there. But I knew I'd hate myself if I didn't say what was on my mind. That I had been turned off by the way spokesmen for the party talked to people. That their attitude had often been arrogant, flippant, and disrespectful. I told them I preferred the polite and respectful manner in which civil rights workers and Black Muslims talk to people, rather than the arrogant fuck you style that used to be popular in New York. I said they cursed too much, and turned off a lot of Black people who would otherwise be responsive to what the party was saying. When I had finished, I waited nervously, fully expecting them to jump all over what I had said. To my profound surprise, nobody did. Everybody agreed that if it was, in fact, how party members were relating to the people, they should change at once. One of the sisters pointed out that there was a leadership crisis in the New York chapter caused by the arrest and imprisonment of the Panther 21. It was well known by everybody in the movement that the New York police had kidnapped the most experienced, able, and intelligent leaders of the New York branch and demanded $100,000 ransom for each one. One of the brothers explained that the Panthers were facing the same problem all over the country because of persecution by pigs. We spent the rest of the afternoon rapping about the Black struggle in New York and the U.S. in general. I was deep in a discussion about strategy and tactics when Emory Douglas came in. I was as happy as a bee in a pollen factory to meet him. I dug his artwork a lot, and he'd even taped a piece he had written on revolutionary art to my closet door. We hit it off at once, and when everybody finished rapping, he took me up to see how the Black Panther newspaper was put together. I was truly impressed by the Panthers in Oakland. After my first visit, I dropped in at their offices regularly. I visited some of the other branches in the area, talking to the people, and asking my usual ton of questions. I spent a couple of nights working at the distribution center for the party paper, which was located in the Fulton district in San Francisco. It was a trip. The papers wouldn't get picked up from the printer until late in the evening, and people would work until the wee hours sorting them out and preparing them for distribution to the Panther offices all around the country. Panthers worked there, but the majority of them seemed to be sisters and brothers from the neighborhood who had just dropped in to give the Panthers a hand. A lot of young people were there, and some elderly sisters and brothers. As we wrapped the papers in bundles, printed addresses, and counted out papers, we sang Panther songs and marching chants. Every now and then, a few stepped outside to sip a little bitter dog. This was supposedly a Panther invention made of red port and lemon juice. It wasn't too bad once I got used to it, and by the time 1 a.m. came around, I loved it. Working on the paper distribution didn't even seem like work. It was more like a party. Somebody always gave me a lift home, and I would fall into a happy sleep, feeling refreshed and renewed. It was splashed across the papers, blaring on the radio, and yet I still couldn't believe it. The face of a serious young man with a gun refused to leave my thoughts. I must have picked up the same newspaper and put it down 100 times. This shit was serious. 17 years old with a rifle under his raincoat. 17 years old and taking freedom into his own hands. 17 years old and defying the whole pig power structure in America. 17 years old and dead. Tears I didn't even know I had poured out. I got on the phone to find somebody who could explain it all. Who was Jonathan Jackson? Who was the young man who came to free a revolutionary black prisoner, holding a district attorney and a pig judge hostage, shouting, "We are the revolutionaries. Free the Soledad brothers by 12:30. Who was he? I had only vaguely heard about the Soledad brothers. A brother who knew all about the cause broke it down to me. 3 unarmed black prisoners were shot down in the yard by a white guard. A grand jury ruled it justifiable homicide. After the verdict, a white guard was found dead. 3 politically conscious black prisoners were charged with the murder and thrown into solitary. They all faced the death penalty. John Clochette, Fleta Drumgo, and George Jackson were the brothers charged with the murder. George Jackson, a brilliant revolutionary theorist and writer, was Jonathan Jackson's brother. I couldn't get the whole thing out of my head. Why were grown men and women living while Jonathan Jackson lay dead? What kind of rage, what kind of oppression, and what kind of country shaped that young man? I felt guilt for being alive and well. Where was my gun, and where was my courage? I was dry-eyed when I attended the funeral. There were hundreds of people. We could barely get into the church. They set up a loudspeaker outside so that people could hear the sermon. Black Panthers, solemn and determined, marched in military formation. I was so glad they were there. Black people need someone to stand up for us, or we will always be victims. I held my arms real close to me, feeling a bit unraveled. Life for us gets so ugly. If I stay a victim, it will kill me, I thought. It was time for me to get my shit together. I wanted to be one of the people who stood up. These were serious times. Angela Davis was running for her life. They had hooked her up with Jonathan Jackson, charged her with kidnapping and murder at the courthouse, even though she was nowhere on the set. They charged her with murder because they claimed that some of the guns used belonged to her. She was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. Not physically, but spiritually. I knew who she was because I had been keeping clippings of her in my file. She was the sister who got fired from her job teaching at a California college because she told everybody she was a communist, and if they didn't like it, they could go to hell. But I wasn't surprised. They will charge black people with anything, using any flimsy excuse. We were very glad they hadn't caught her. I hoped they never would. The air was charged. Everything was happening so fast, and I wasn't blind anymore. I was seeing things straight, seeing them more clearly than ever before. I had so many things to do. If you are deaf, dumb, and blind to what's happening in the world, you're under no obligation to do anything. But if you know what's happening and you don't do anything but sit on your ass, then you're nothing but a punk. I tried to explain how I felt to some of the people I knew. I wanted to struggle on a full-time basis. They urged me to join the Panther Party. I went over in my mind all the criticisms I had of the party. They had said, "You'll be good for the party, and the party will be good for you. The party is only as strong as its people." It made a lot of sense to me. For the first time in months, I felt calm and sure of what I was going to do. I told them that the first thing I was going to do when I returned to New York was join the party. I thought about it all the way home. Of all the things I had wanted to be when I was a little girl, a revolutionary certainly wasn't one of them. And now it was the only thing I wanted to do. Everything else was secondary. It occurred to me that even though I wanted to become a revolutionary more than anything else in the world, I still didn't have the slightest idea what I would have to do to become one. Chapter 14. "You're the property of the feds now," one of the marshals told me like he really believed it. "We're taking you to MCC, the Federal Prison Manhattan Correctional Center, where you'll stay while you stand trial for bank robbery." It was January 5th, 1976, 15 days after I had been acquitted on the kidnapping charge in Brooklyn Supreme Court. I was still on Rikers Island. He busied himself tying me up with what seemed an endless amount of chains and shackles. Another stupid-looking marshal told me how sorry he was to see me again. He said I'd given him hell last time. I didn't even recognize him. He said he had worked on the last other bank robbery trial and had gotten chewed out because I got pregnant. "You were framed," I told him. He looked at me all dumb, scratching his head. Yeah, that's right." I started to laugh. Even the other marshal started to crack up. "It's not so funny," he said. "I lost my commendation. That went down in my record." I laughed even harder. The only way I can describe MCC is modern gray, with dabs of colored paint here and there. It's one of those ugly inner-city fortress buildings, anti-nature, anti-human, and cold to all the senses. There was no fresh air because the entire building was air-conditioned, and the only natural light came in from narrow glass slits cut into the side of the building and wired with alarms.
The guards looked like space-age Robotons, with blue blazers, gray pants, and walkie-talkies and beepers. After I had been issued the standard uniform for women, a yellow jumpsuit and tennis shoes, I was led up to the women's section. To my absolute surprise, I was placed in general population, given a key to my cage, and told that there was no lock-in time. We were supposed to stand by the cell doors at various times of the day to be counted. The women's section was a relatively small area, comprising a central area for eating and recreation, a TV room, and 3 split-level tiers. There were a few offices, 1 or 2 rooms that served as classrooms, and that was it. The only other place women could go, once in a while, was to recreation on the roof, which was covered with huge metal anti-helicopter bars. After spending more than a month in that confining little place, the women were climbing the walls, and I'm sure the men felt the same way. A few of the federal prisoners were big time, with money and connections. They had been arrested for more sophisticated crimes than the average state prisoner, but the majority were poor, black, or third world, just like in the state jails. But just like in the street, money talks. A lot of men on the honor floor, which was on the same floor as the women, had money, and rumor had it they would send their favorite guards out to buy them Chinese or Italian food, or send them to the Jewish delicatessen depending on their mood. One drug dealer made frequent visits to the women's section in the wee small hours for conjugal visits with his wife. Since the men on the honor floor had contact with the women, many tried to buy them by sending them huge quantities of commissary items. Others tried to impress the women with tall tales about how much they had ripped off or how big they were on the street. I was sitting on the bench with this white guy, waiting for them to take me to court one morning, and he was steady talking $1 and $2 million deals he had pulled off. He was some kind of con artist, busted for stock fraud. "You shouldn't be here," I told him. "You should be in the White House with all the other big-time con artists." "I was trying," he said. "I was trying like hell." There were 2 sisters who I knew from Rikers. I was really happy to see them both. Skeets was a strong, stand-up sister who kept her mouth shut, minded her business, and didn't take any shit from anybody. She was a real warm-hearted person, generous and open, and maintained a whole lot of humanity even though she was facing a hunk of time on a bank robbery case. I was shocked when I ran into Charlie, who I had known on Rikers Island as Charlene. She had changed completely. She was no longer the thin, round-faced young sister I had known on the Rock. It was as if she had aged overnight. She had written some dynamite poetry and had been part of our drama group, but this time she had been arrested for a parole violation on a technicality and just didn't give a damn about anything anymore. She was bitter and tired, and her whole attitude can be summed up in 2 words that she frequently used: shove it. She told me that her freedom depended on whether or not she passed a high school equivalency test. Everybody encouraged her to study, but she just didn't seem to care anymore. She said she was tired of jumping through hoops and didn't give a damn about what happened. I understood how she felt, but I hated to see her so bitter and so hurt, and nowhere to go with it, nothing positive to apply it to. I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how, and I was only going to be there for a hot minute. The only thing that perked her up was the struggle the women got into to improve medical care at the jail. At the time, the health situation was horrible. Women came in off the street and were given no physical exam, no tests, no nothing. They had trouble seeing gynecologists and having their most basic needs met, medical or otherwise. Since we were a tiny minority of the prison populations, our needs were ignored. The women got together and wrote complaints to the warden. Charlie was one of the women who worked the hardest to get better medical conditions. It was kind of ironic when I think about it now. A little more than a year later, I had heard over the prison grapevine that Charlene had died from undiagnosed cancer of the uterus. The Queens Bank robbery, which I was here for, was one of the wildest trials I ever went through. We had just finished with the Brooklyn kidnapping case, and I was not at all looking forward to going to trial again so soon. For almost 3 years now, Evelyn had worked on my cases continuously. She had quit her job as a professor at New York University Law School on the day I was arrested on the turnpike to become my lawyer. One of the few cases she had accepted since my arrest, mostly to earn some money, was ready for trial, and she couldn't postpone it any longer, so I had to get someone else for my trial. Some of the brothers and sisters recommended Stanley Cohen to me. They said he was a good lawyer and would do a good job on this kind of case. I was hesitant because I had always had black lawyers representing me. I felt that they would probably be more understanding and more sensitive to the situation I was dealing with. I'm not talking about any old black lawyer, because some of them make a whole lot of money and think like Richard Nixon. I'm talking about those who are concerned with the plight of black people. I was especially sensitive to the issue after months of listening to some of the sisters at Rikers. They were so brainwashed, they thought a white lawyer, any white lawyer, was better than a black lawyer. They also felt the same way about white doctors, white dentists, white teachers, etc. I ain't going to court with no black lawyer, they'd say. I want me a white lawyer who is friendly with the judge and ain't gonna make him mad. I tried to tell them that it didn't matter what color the lawyer was. If the lawyer went against the judge and really put up a fight for the client, the judge was going to get mad. Few, if any, black defendants have ever been freed because the judge liked their lawyer. If you had a dime for every time a judge and a defense lawyer sat down to lunch and discussed some black client rotting away in jail, you'd be able to stop working and live on the interest. I decided to talk with Cohen and see whether I thought he would be good for the case. Stanley was a middle-aged, Jewish, feisty-looking man who somehow reminded me of W.C. Fields. He had a dramatic streak in him and could change the tone and mood of his voice from indignant to pleading in a matter of seconds. He had a long list of acquittals in his record and told funny stories about the strategies he used in this or that trial. He had once been a member of the Communist Party and continued to have progressive politics. "Why do you like being a criminal lawyer?" I asked him. "How can you stand to fight racism in the court system knowing how much racism and injustice is involved?" It was a loaded question put out there to see how he would answer it. I expected him to say something like, somebody had to do it, somebody had to make the sacrifice. "I like to win," he said. "I do it because I like to win." I liked him, and I decided I wanted him to defend me on the bank robbery case. Evelyn gave Stanley the transcripts from the time I was beaten up in court by the U.S. Marshals trying to photograph me, together with all of the other documents in her file, and worked with him on the trial strategy. Andrew Jackson had pled guilty, so I was on trial alone. Everything was rush, rush, rush. The railroad train was whistling, and it could hardly wait to take me up the river. The new judge assigned to the case wanted the case over with, and he wanted it over with fast. We wanted to question the prospective jurors about their opinion, what they had seen and heard in the media, etc. The judge was determined not to have a long voir dire, and so we compromised. A questionnaire was made up asking some of the questions we submitted, and others the prosecutor submitted. After we went through the answers, we were to pick or eliminate jurors, asking additional questions as needed. Some of the answers were so contradictory and such a study on the level of racism in America that it would take a book just to report on them. In 100% of the cases, we were able to tell whether the prospective juror was black, white, or other just by reading the answers. The trial had a lighthearted feel to it. Everyone was kind of decided that we would enjoy the fight and fight as hard as we could, without worrying about whether we were going to win or lose. I don't think that there was a single one of us, with the possible exception of Assata Shakur, who really thought we were going to win. Assata, who was working as a legal assistant, kept telling me, "We're going to win this one, Assata." But I sure as hell didn't believe it. They had taken a bank picture of a woman robbing a bank, printed my name under it as being positively identified, and then placed that picture in newspapers, subway stations, and I think even on the side of buses. They had this picture posted in every bank in New York. There was not a person in New York who went to the bank, rode the subway, or walked the streets who had not seen that photograph with my name printed under it 1,000 times. There was no way of even counting how many times that picture had been flashed on television, with the announcer calling out my name. The public had been so saturated with that image that I felt it was crazy to take this trial seriously. After Stanley was familiar with some of the facts, I asked him what he thought my chances were. "I'd be lying if I told you I thought they looked good. In reality, they look pretty lousy, but I believe you, and I'm going to fight for you. And believe me, I like to fight." We agreed that I would act as co-counsel on the case. "You're a lousy lawyer," he would tell me every time we got into an argument over some strategy, "but you're better than a lot of lawyers I know who passed the bar." The atmosphere was electric. The courtroom was packed every day with sisters and brothers who had come to watch the circus. I couldn't stop staring. I have always said the best thing about being on trial is getting to see and smile at the spectators. Seeing so many beautiful people in the courtroom gave us the push we needed to get down and take care of business. I felt that way during all of my trials, but this trial had an atmosphere that made it even more special. People from all over the black community dropped by. The Muslim sisters and brothers brought their prayer rugs and broke out into prayer in the hallway of the courthouse. People brought their children explaining what was happening. One little girl broke up the whole courtroom when she asked out loud, "Is that a fascist pig, Mommy?" pointing up at the judge. It was as if black folks had just taken over the courtroom, letting everybody know they were watching what was going down. The first thing we did was ask for a lineup. The way I had been identified was from a photo. The FBI had selected my photograph from the militant casebook. This book contained the photographs of all the militants the FBI wanted to send to prison. After they had gotten my photograph out of the militant casebook, they put it in with a few other photographs of women. Of course, mine, a mugshot, was the only one with numbers across the front of it. The rest were normal. The FBI then showed this group of pictures to the robbery witnesses and asked them to identify someone who somewhat resembled or bore a likeness to the woman who robbed the bank. 2 of the people who were in the bank signed affidavits saying that the photograph with the numbers across it, my mugshot, looked somewhat like the woman. The rest, who had been in the bank at the time of the robbery, made no such identification. We told the judge we wanted a lineup because we thought the initial identification of me as the bank robber was suggestive and tainted. But before the judge had arranged for the lineup, the prosecutor called one of the so-called witnesses to testify. Since I was the only black woman sitting in the defendant's chair, of course he identified me. We protested the procedure, but the judge admitted his testimony anyway. We finally did arrange for a lineup, and, of course, the other so-called witnesses picked out another woman. Since the photo identification part of the case was based on nothing more than all niggers look alike, the FBI tried to use scientific evidence to gain a conviction. Their plan to superimpose the bank surveillance photo over my photograph failed because they only had one photo of me that was taken at the same angle as the bank robbery picture. It was one of the photographs taken when they assaulted me in the courtroom before the trial began, when I refused to let them take my picture. The FBI agent had blocked out the faces and hands of the marshals and FBI agents choking and assaulting me. They had cropped the picture so that the only thing the jury could see was my face. But my facial expression in the photograph was one of such agony that it was hard for them to convince the jury of anything else. So the FBI came up with a brilliant idea. They brought in some dude from the FBI who said he was an expert on identifying photographs by examining them under a microscope. He was a real pro, slick as grease. He had charts and diagrams and whatnot, and I was worried to death that the jury would go for that crap. He sounded real good, until it came time for cross-examination. It turned out that he was a specialist in paleontology, and had spent a lot of time studying rocks. He tried to claim that his expertise at examining rocks made him able to identify people. Under cross-examination, all his carefully constructed expertise turned into a pile of rocks. And this new technical breakthrough in crime fighting proved to be nothing but a fraud. Because the prosecution had been allowed to introduce this new scientific evidence, the judge said we had the right to find a photographic expert to rebut the testimony. Since we didn't have a dime, the court agreed to pay for it. The day our photograph expert testified, I slumped down in the seat. He was a real straight-looking white guy who looked like he subscribed to Reader's Digest. But the guy had credentials in photography a mile long, and you could tell from the way he talked that he loved photography and that he was incensed over what the FBI was trying to do. He explained to the jury the chemical process of photography and that what the FBI agent said was absolutely impossible. He said that if you look at a photograph under a microscope, all you see is little dots. His testimony was so correct and his facts so together that the prosecutor barely bothered to cross-examine him. The capper came when the manager of the bank came forward to testify in my behalf. He said that I was definitely not the woman who robbed the bank, and that the robber was a different height and weight from mine. We could see the prosecutor quietly creep under his table. His last hope was the summation. In his closing statement, he tried to make up for everything he had not proved with the evidence. He painted me as an evil, conniving monster. He told the jury that I was hiding the fact that I had big fat arms like the woman who was shown robbing the bank, that I was concealing my arms because I had not worn a sleeveless dress in court. The trial was held in the middle of January. As he was talking, I politely rolled up my sleeves right there in the courtroom, exposing my very thin arms. When he got to the final part of his closing, he grew strangely confident. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this woman is very clever, very conniving. She has tried to deceive this jury in every way. But she has made one mistake, ladies and gentlemen. She made one fatal error. Then he held up a picture of the woman robbing the bank, and in the other hand, he held up my mugshot picture. She made one mistake, he kept repeating. She forgot to change her earrings. She has the same earrings on. The prosecutor was so dramatic. The scene was straight out of the movies. You could tell he had been watching The Late Show. Both the women in the bank and I had on hoop earrings. When Stanley summed up, he just said, Will all the women in the courtroom who have hoop earrings please stand up? Half the women rose to their feet. While the jury was out deliberating, I paced back and forth in the holding pen. They're going to convict me anyway, I told Afeni. They probably weren't even listening. That jury isn't going to convict you, Assata, Afeni replied. Didn't you see the faces of the jurors, especially the black ones? It was true. I had seen them look at me differently after the truth started coming out. And I knew that the black jurors in the deliberating room would make all the difference in the world. If nothing else, they remind some of the more racist whites that black people are human beings. It's a shame that too many black people try to avoid jury duty, instead of trying to slow down the railroad. A lot of times, it's a matter of simple economics. Black people often feel like they can't afford to sit on a jury, that the money they would lose would mean a sacrifice for their family. And they are probably right, but their sitting on a jury might mean that their neighbor's son or daughter doesn't end up frying in the electric chair or rotting away behind bars. A verdict had been reached. I could tell what it was before we even entered the courtroom. The pigs were upset, to put it mildly. The female guard who escorted me to court every day seemed glad. The jury read the verdict. Acquittal. The courtroom broke into a loud cheer. The judge just gave up calling for order. He had to wait for the shouting to die down. It was a long time coming. All the spectators were jumping around, hugging each other. The marshals led me out of the courtroom and handcuffed me. They brought me back to Rikers Island, where I was put into solitary confinement.
Context of White Supremacy. We will pick up for the second audio segment on Chapter 15. Chapter 15. Context of White Supremacy. If you would like to participate, thoughts from the first couple chapters that we heard this week, feel free to chime in. The number to dial is 760-569-7676. The code is 564-943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. That number again, 760-569-7676. The code is 564-943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you do not want to use your phone, you can chime in using the free Flash phone. It's online, works anywhere in the world. The address, if you need it, tiny, tiny.cc/1 race. And that is the number 1. That address again, tiny, tiny.cc/1 race. And that is the number 1. When you put in that address, click the link on the left of the page. It says free Flash phone. When you do so, it will open a tiny window on your screen. Very simple procedure. The first line you see, it is a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out, which again is 760-569-7676. The code is 564-943 pound. For the folks, if you're using the Flash phone, you don't need the pound sign. Just select the number from the drop-down menu, and then you'll see the second line where it says code 564-943. Do not put in the pound sign if you are using the Flash player. No pound sign. 564-943, and then just go to the last line. It will ask for a name. You can click random keys, use a nickname. If you're comfortable with your real name, that's fine too. Once you get all that entered, click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the program. You should be able to hear us live, and it's the same procedure if you would like to participate.
You'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press *6. You should hear the audio prompt to press the number 1, and I'll see your hand. We'll get you on the line. With that, we will go ahead and nab folks. It was pretty wild this week during this section on the Soledad brothers and Jonathan Jackson. George Jackson reminded me I read George Jackson's book Soledad Brother. I read that right around the same time that I read this book. May have been in succession, but that would be another great book to follow up to get more information about this period of time and what was happening. Anywho, all the folks who dialed in with a hand up, your line should be open. Feel free to chime in. Comments from the folks with a hand up? Any comments, observations?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers and listeners out there. It's Jimmy for. She covered quite a bit this time, but, I kept reading over the first part on page 195 when she was describing how she felt upon learning Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, or murdered may be a more correct word to describe what happened to Dr. King. That on April 4th, 1968, James Earl Ray, shot Dr. King. He was convicted of it, the crime. He died in prison in 1998. There are certain events that happen in life that's so devastating, so shocking, so overwhelming that it seems that like time itself is recorded from that point. What you were doing and how you felt at that specific time. And Dr. King's murder was one of those times. I thought it was interesting that one of her, Assata Shakur's reaction was the lack of fear. And I know that we've discussed, fear on the show before. Intelligent fear seems to be, something that is desired, when we're dealing with white people. The book said that she felt absurd and impotent. But I can remember the incident. I was 13 years old at the time. She was older than I was. But I can remember feeling the enormous wave of fear. And she also mentioned George Lincoln Rockwell, racist, former Navy commander and commander of the Nazi Party. But when she, was having those feelings about Dr. King, I had to read it again to figure out. She said that she was looking for a George Lincoln Rockwell. So, meaning any white person that would fit that ideology and that type. And she talked about the Native Americans, on Alcatraz. That's something that I did not know about, and which, I, could imagine that anyone that tried to, assert themselves and exercise their constitutional rights, that they would be put down. In this case, the government, turned the lights off on the Native Americans that was occupying Alcatraz. I'll reserve some of my other comments for later. But the one last thing, when the Native American told her to check out Aquasana on that border town that they had taken back for Native Americans. Now it is a casino, resort, and spa area with fine dining, and I'm sure that white people still have a hand in some of that. I'll mute my line. Thanks for taking the call.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Other folks have comments they want to make sure they get in?
Can I be heard?
I think I heard two people. I think a firefighter and one other caller.
Yes, you can go first. I'll wait.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting on how the chapter started out, chapter 13. It kind of like reminded me of my experience when the event of Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered. I was at the young age of, in the 5th grade, something like 11, 12 years old during that time. And the only thing I can remember, I kind of like regarded him as a king. His surname was King, but as a king because he was on television a lot. And from a 12-year-old 5th grader, I looked at it as this person was doing everything correct, and he did not. It was like Jesus. It was like, from my understandings of when I was forced to go to church, as Jesus didn't do anything wrong and was nonviolent, and wow, some white person killed him. I thought all hell was going to break loose from that when that took place. So there was a level of fear with me at that particular point in time, of knowing that, didn't understand on what was going to happen, but I knew it wasn't going to be good at the time. That was my memory of it. It was also interesting, she mentioned about her brief marriage. I assume that's what it was, brief marriage. And very honest about it. A lot of times when people go into autobiographies, some things they may kind of like take out that they may not be proud about. But she was honest enough to put that in there, and I thought it was very, very important that she mentioned, just because you have a relationship where both people are quote unquote less confused on the system of racial white supremacy, that does not mean under the context of race, the global system of racial white supremacy, that particular union is going to stay together. I think I heard Dr. Welsing, I believe, or it wasn't Dr. Welsing, it was Mr. Fuller, stated that it's very hard for two soldiers to stay into one foxhole under the system of racial white supremacy. I believe I'm quoting one of the other correctly. It's very difficult under the system of racial white supremacy for two soldiers to be in one foxhole. So, fill in the blanks otherwise, for the rest of the things that take place, very difficult. That was very important, a part that she included. The whole idea of going somewhere because something is better or more sophisticated, they got their act more together. That has been part of my thoughts in the past also, as far as the experience, as far as the experience is concerned. But actually, I think, I could be wrong, but I think under the context of the system of racial white supremacy, there is no place where you can go where it's better, it's more progressive, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it starts and ends with, it starts and ends with the person that you see in the mirror. I think as far as codification, thinking correctly, as correct as possible on a daily basis, saying and doing the most correct and most correct thing as far as that concern is what it's all about as far as the base is concerned. And I think she would learn as I also did not know that there were indigenous peoples on the quote unquote island of Alcatraz, but I'm not surprised. I guarantee you that it didn't start that way. That's the place more than likely where they were forced to stay at, knowing racist white man and woman and child. That's where they were regulated to, based on quote unquote reservation. When it comes to the place that is called California, because only white people draw the lines of where something ends and where it begins. Very quickly moving on to chapter 14 with the bank situation. She was still in the process of learning. Of learning, with no, that's not what I was going to say. But anyway, with the whole idea of the lawyer, the new lawyer, and it was good that she was able to get acquitted for that. Because basically what was taking place with her, I think, with a person of her profile, the idea is to pile up charge after charge after charge after charge. And that person spends their whole time and energy defending themselves to keep themselves from rotting in prison for the rest of their lives or being executed. And that was the situation she was in. So ultimately that ended up, I think, causing her to do what she ended up doing. That, I guess, will come later on in the book. And I would, from there, just table the rest of my thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Can I be heard? Hello?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Greetings, justice, and to all the callers. One thing that I've thought about is with white people, they have a history of doing the same thing over and over and over, and I think a lot of non-white people haven't caught up to it. And where this comes into play is when she discusses the so-called scientific information that was trumped up and used to try to convict her. And that took me right back to the most recent incident with the FBI coming out and stating that they falsely convicted these 100+ people. Some of them were already executed. Under these false information, there's different types of false information, the hair testing and things like that. And it just goes to show that when white people want to do something to you, they'll stoop to any level to do it. And I always thought about something as far as the FBI having a 99% conviction rate. And they're considered, I guess, the most efficient law enforcement agency on the planet for their ability to convict people. But it should really give us a lot of pause for thought with any conviction that they have, especially when it deals with non-white people, simply because they will do absolutely anything to put us behind bars into greater confinement. And I think that a lot of us haven't really caught up to that concept. And if you look over the history, this is something that they repeat over and over and over. So a lot of the different scenarios that we encounter as non-white people dealing with their systems and the different systems they have in place to basically subjugate us or to put us into greater confinement, it's a lot of the same repeat tactics that I think we just haven't studied well enough to work our way around the truth of what they actually do to us every day. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I'll meet my line now.
Do we have any other folks who had a hand up or folks who are listening who had comments they want to make sure they get in?
I've heard.
Could you speak up a bit, Thomas, in New York?
Absolutely. Thomas Smith in New York. How's everything going with everyone on the line? Had a few observations. One I stood up to me because she did a lot of talking about it. Was once again that revolution. She used Cuba, I think, as an example of something, with South America, Central America. Yeah, they actually have revolution. Cuba, for instance, was a slave colony, and after slavery ended, the people ran things, and then white people funded the white Cubans to pretty much take over and built it up, and left the people on the plantations and farms living poor, and they wanted to go back to when they ruled things. And what are we going back to? I don't get what the revolution is going to be. I don't know what that's going to look like. Because, I don't want to go back to Jim Crow. I don't want to go back to slavery. And I don't see too much more to go back to. Lastly, the last point was, it just shows how much power they have to just trump up charges. Bring in experts to lie. It kind of reminded me of hair evidence, but this guy was coming up with some new science. Or what do you really do? I study rocks. You don't study people. It's just you can't believe anything they say and do. I'm on.
Yep. White people do have the power. When we talk about them being master deceivers, they have the power to exercise that deception at any time, in any place, and frequently folks, for one, not even able to figure out that they have been lying until, it's too late, as was the case for some of those folks who were executed before the FBI acknowledged that they've been giving out all this bogus data. But then a lot of times, even if you do figure out, hey, these folks are just, making up stuff as we go, even then you still can't do anything about it just because they do have the dominant power position currently. Hopefully we will be able to correct that immediately. Some of the observations, and if folks who are listening have things you want to get in, we have about 25 minutes or so before we get to the next audio segment. The chapters are a little unbalanced this week, so some of the next chapters are a little longer, so we'll still have time for folks to chime in. I think just don't lollygag. If you have things you want to share, go ahead and get your hand up. As I said, it reminded me this week just George Jackson and hearing about that. It's been a while since I've read Soledad Brother, Jonathan Jackson as well, his brother who was also shot and killed, infamous standoff. Some of the comments that stood out, I appreciated her starting off with the assassination, murder of Dr. King. I think that's another example people should reference when anybody gets on their tired rant that black people don't fight back and we just take, whatever white people want to dish out, we just take it. That would be another example because, you had black people across the country who went out and were engaged in all kinds of counter violence and destruction of white property and trying to get at white people. She was not, Assata Shakur was not the only one saying, hey, some white people need to bleed and or die as a result of Dr. King's death. So just that's another one that folks should add in their record for the next time that pops up. I think the same thing with caller in Florida. Really appreciated her detail about the marriage situation. And as he said, the maturity, the honesty in her reflection, where she's not bashing him, just, hey, this is not really working out. And, we have different ideas about what's going to happen here. So we're able to come to a conclusion and still be friends. That is spectacular. Just being honest about things and keep it moving with as minimal, as little conflict as possible. The reading, I think she stressed that again, the significance of reading. Actually, that was another thing. I had so many flashbacks of different books that I had read around this time that were related. I think even more of that's coming up in the next segment where she goes into more detail about the Black Panther Party. But hearing about the situation at Alcatraz with so-called Indians, Native Americans, their takeover, there's extensive detail about that situation in Agents of Repression, the FBI's war against the Black Panther Party and the American Indian movement by Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall. I read that around the same time that I read this book, Assata Shakur's autobiography, and it gives a pretty detailed account of what happened at Alcatraz, why they were doing this, the fact that it wasn't being utilized anyway, that, they could have easily given them this land. It wasn't like anybody would have been, put out on the street or lost their business or anything like that. And of course, white people didn't even had difficulties about trying to comply with that. But lots of detail in that book about Assata Shakur as well, Minister Malcolm, a lot of details about racism in that text, Agents of Repression. It stood out when she was going into detail about her experience being in California and seeing all these hippies and other folks and just all this stuff going on, and the Berkeley environment. I used to live in the Bay Area, and I wasn't alive at this time, so I don't know what it was like firsthand experience of what it was like, but just having been there, I can only imagine how confusing this sort of environment would be, particularly at this time period. You got so much energy and so many things are happening all over the world. And it looks like you got, some really cool young white people. They're students and, they're down. It's not these old crotchety white people, Bull Connor and Richard Nixon and George Lincoln Rockwell. It's not all of these folks. Adlai Stevenson, some of the other folks from the scene at that particular time, George Wallace. It's not, these old white guys. These are young white people, and they're progressive, and they got long hair, and they're doing drugs, and they got their signs and stuff down with the man. I can only imagine how confusing that would be for a black person to try to figure all of that out. And then you got the COINTELPRO stuff going on. It just seems like a really an environment where it would be easy to just be totally bewildered and overwhelmed, because there's so many things happening, there's so many lies, there's so much violence, it's so dangerous. Just trying to get some bearing to be clear and not confused about everything that's happening and why these people are doing this and what's the best thing that we should be doing to try to solve problems for black people. It just seems like a really challenging environment to navigate. Communism and these wacky terms people are throwing us. She talked about revolution, just the terms alone that are being used, and trying to figure out what this means. What does that mean? People using the same word and got 1,000 different definitions for it. Let's see some of the other things that stood out from this week. The jury duty, I appreciated her commentary when she gets to talking about the trial situation. It reminded, because we've had that conversation so many times about the efforts that racists make to make sure that black people do not get to participate on juries. The significance of being registered, even though we have brought up before that we think even if you're a black person and you're registered, that does not mean that white people don't have the ability to keep you off the jury, and even some speculation that might be happening in mass right now. But definitely make sure that you are registered, so at least you know that you have the opportunity, should have the opportunity to be a part of a jury situation. But I appreciated her honest in kind of dissecting even what happens there, when she was saying that for some black people, it's, hey, I cannot afford to lose a day's paycheck to be on this jury. And yes, that might mean the difference in my neighbor's son, daughter, being free or being in greater confinement. And that is the reality. But again, it's white people, because they are in the dominant power position. It's so easy for them to put us in all of these weak, compromising positions where you just got 2 bad choices or 4 bad choices or 5 bad choices about what you're going to do. But I definitely appreciated her kind of breaking down the whole way that went. I also appreciated her analysis on the Black Panther Party and some of the critiques. I think people that are familiar with some of the literature on them, those are some of the common critiques that are labeled against them. And even I would say the point where she said she didn't like kind of the arrogant attitude that they would sometimes convey when talking to other people about the problem and what should be done. And she said she was more appreciative of the quote-unquote civil rights workers, their respectful stance, and just going and talking to people and not cursing at them and yelling at them and talking down to them with a lot of condescension. I think that's super important, and I observe that same pattern right now, like 2015, a lot of times where victims will get a little bit of information about racism, white supremacy, and then kind of talk down to other people, as though we were born with this information. Like we came out of the womb reading Amos Wilson and Assata Shakur and Dr. Marimba Ani. Like we had this information since we were 2, and the rest of you lame chumps, it's your fault that we're not doing right. I see a lot of that amongst us, and I too think that it would be better. I think we'd be a lot more effective if we could minimize that and really just try to be as courteous, patient with other Black people as possible. I will pause just because I see other folks that want to comment, make sure everybody gets their chance to share their views. Other caller that had a hand up, did you have commentary you wanted to make sure you got in? Other person, I think, had a hand up. Did you have commentary, or are you just listening?
I'm sorry, I was still muted. You guys didn't hear any of that. But good evening, everyone. Good evening, Gus, and good evening to all the other callers. This is Carmen in Texas. I was listening to that part that Shakur was talking about with people not serving on jury duty. And Gus is exactly like you said. They are master deceivers. And, it's not only just, racism, white supremacy should be practiced. It should be fun. Deception of any kind should be practiced. It should be fun. I know you said don't watch too many movies, but the guy on a movie, he said, sometimes the only reason I get up in the morning is for the lies. And I said that was a truly white statement. But she said, the young people, they get the jury summons and then they realize they just can't take it off. And, and it's just too bad we're in that position where we can't vote. I'm going to say it once again. If they had any inkling that you knew how important jury duty was and that you were going there to do your duty, you would never get a jury summons. But in their great ability to deceive, it's always, they'll make you think that, wow, we're not on juries. Too bad we don't serve on juries. Or, wow, we're not voting. Too bad we don't vote. Or, wow, we're having a riot. Too bad we're burning down our own homes and businesses. I mean, everything is a deception. There is nothing with these people that's not a deception. But that man said it truer than anything else. He says, sometimes I get up in the morning, the only reason I get up is for the lies. So no, she thinks that us not being on jury duty is just us, but it really is them. And us not voting is just us. It really is them. I found 5,000 voter registrations that have been shoved into drawers for Black people. So everything's a deception. They never tell the truth. They really don't. Anytime you want to blame yourself for something, you need to step back and check that. That's my comment.
Somebody else with a hand up, just chime in. Want to make sure you get your comments in as well.
Good evening.
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. I apologize. I kind of just jumped in, but the thing that I wanted to comment on, I hope I didn't misunderstand because, like I said, I did just chime in. In regards to Assata Shakur, I'm not sure how everybody else is thinking or whatever. I'm from that generation. Let me say that. And I think that I heard some people mention that they had read other books about the Panthers, and I guess the thing that kind of, for lack of a better word, I'll say kind of concerns or disturbs me is that the Black Panther Party, because there was just a lot of groups. Everybody was always pretty much into something during the Black Power era, as it was called. But the Panthers are not the same throughout the United States. So I think that if people just kind of read Assata Shakur or one or two books or one or two people, they might get a misperception as to what was really going on. Of course, it wasn't a perfect group, but obviously it had captured the mentality of the youth at the time. So I didn't find that there was a degree of arrogance per se. I think one of the things that kind of like captivated people was just that, people were saying brother, sister. It wasn't superficial like it might be now, when people said, people were, how shall we say, felt like they were somebody gaining a little bit respect in that regard. But I would kind of agree that my kind of perception at this point in time is that the kind of like talking down to people, as you as I heard part of what you said, Gus, in terms of alluding to, and that's probably not across the board, but I think, well, at least let me just say I have kind of like perceived that discrepancy between now and then, that people get education, miseducation, or experience or whatever, and they just kind of like, go off like, they just kind of like got some, talking down to people, for lack of a better term. That's my perception now, as opposed to then. And I just like we keep saying that people would just kind of like read more from different people, and particularly get a little bit background history of what people actually went through, the few that are kind of left that are still living now, even those that are incarcerated, to get a real perspective. Because in listening to the story by Assata Shakur, I don't want to be going on too long, but I think that what we're hearing is her youth, her, I'm going to say somewhat in some ways naivete, okay? And I don't think that it really represents the, matter of fact, I think I can say that it doesn't represent the general movement. That's her experience, but it does not represent the depth of what was going on with the Black Panther Party, in all respect. So I hope that people would read other books as well. I'm not saying hers not valid, it's also her experience. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Right on. Yeah, that does. Did you say you didn't get to hear the first section of the book?
I said I didn't get to hear the first. Oh, no, I heard that. I didn't get to hear the first part of today's conversation. It kind of like just came in, but yeah, I did. Okay. And
have you read this book before?
Oh God, yeah, but not this online stuff, not the actual book itself. And that's kind of like why I got the perception, if I recall correctly, of some people, no disrespect to the young lady who reads very well, but I kind of felt that it was kind of naive, and it didn't kind of capture the, and that's okay. I mean, it's understandable if you were not in that era. It didn't really capture the emotion of what was going on during that time. But no, not the reading. No, I mean, this is my first time hearing the reading, but I read the book, yeah.
That's cool. I just was curious.
No problem.
We have, I'll say maybe 7 minutes before we get to the second audio. Like I said, the chapters, they're not the same size, right? Right? So these chapters are a little longer than the first ones that we heard, so making sure we get time in. I did also want to make sure that I got in, because I think someone says pretty often about sobriety would be best under conditions of racism, and particularly that even if you are going to consume intoxicants, alcohol, whatever the case may be, that you should be codified about that. I think that came out in a pretty wild way as well when she's out in California and they're smoking cannabis or doing whatever they're doing, and watching folks hippies getting arrested and what have you. And then the Panther members come up, and it did seem like they were not nasty or talking down. It did seem like they were pretty courteous, talking to them and saying, oh, by the way, you might want to codify your consumption of that substance if you're going to be out here, because a lot of people get locked up for that. Particularly if you're going to be out here talking rowdy about pigs and revolution, you might want to codify that behavior, because a whole lot of folks end up in greater confinement like that, which I think also is still the case in 2015. Did folks have any other comments they wanted to get in? We have about six minutes, so if you can be to the point with what you want to share.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. If you could speak up, because it's kind of windy.
Yep, I will. I'm sorry. I was under the fan. A lot of these places that are communist during this era, and it seems to be a big part of their movement is the communist thing, is they were forced into communism, or they became communist because they didn't want to do business with the United States, that's like China, or Cuba, who wanted to do business with them because the United States didn't want to do business with them. They went to the next best option. So I think that they're not really being realistic about that either. And another term that they use, and I hear some people on 125th Street the other day, and they throw out this Black Power thing. I would love to know what that looks like. I'm gonna ask them to define that for me, because I don't see us having power right now to do too much of anything. It hasn't shown. So I just don't get that whole concept. I would love to. Maybe you have answers, guys. I would just love to hear what they were really talking about. What would Black Power look like? That was it. I'll wait for the second reading.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, about the capitalism and communism. In my opinion, it sounds just like white people who practice racial white supremacy to compartmentalize reality on how people do things, to compartmentalize it to their best interest, which is to mistreat people, and they put these tags about capitalism and communism, and basically you have non-white people who are trying to figure out on solving the problem of racial white supremacy, and from that standpoint, that group has the place to use whatever means that they deem necessary in order to accomplish the destruction of the system of racist white supremacy and replace it with a system of justice. So there's no limits on what you are, what you should do in order to get that job done. That's my thoughts on that whole thing about capitalism and communism, and it's compartmentalizing, which I think comes directly from white people who practice racism. Thank you.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, I just want to bring note to, she was describing the prison conditions and some of the goings on in there, the way the structure was set up. If you were a high-profile criminal, such as a drug dealer, then money would talk. You could get cordial visits with your wife, and even, a visit to some other cells with women if the prices was right. I guess they was negotiating. And it sounded like the guards were pimping the female inmates. I mean, and a lot of other atrocities that take place in these prisons. And like you say, when the system is set up to benefit, one particular group, in every area and in every type of environment, they come out on top. And she mentioned she had two sisters that she was in Rikers Island with. She ran into one later, Charlie, whom she had known as Charlene earlier. And I I think that that's kind of indicative of, the hardness that takes place with experiencing, some of these, greater confinements, these prisons. And also the importance of serving on a jury. And then an interesting point about on page 213 where, she was talking about the photo identification part of the case was based on nothing more than all niggas look alike. Okay, I'll mute my line.
Few minutes before we get to the second audio, just a quick point when Assata, when she was describing some of her critiques of the Black Panther presentation, she was being specific to the New York chapters that she observed, so she was not making a general statement about the entire Black Panther Party. However, I have seen where Huey P. Newton did echo some of the same concerns that she had. In fact, unless my memory is in error, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he was saying that the presentation, the cursing and things, did turn off some black people. Not saying every person spoke that way, but that did happen at times. And that did turn off a significant number of black people. He even said that at one point it kind of got to a point where you would go to a Black Panther meeting and there were white people. It would only be white people, or it'd be a large number of white people in the audience. But yeah, she was speaking specifically to the New York branches she had observed. Importance of black journalism, black newspaper. I think we had talked about that before, the Black Panther, the newspaper that they had, and being really important because which is also in Agents of Repression, where they talk about how racists, white supremacists used journalism to attack the Black Panther Party. We already heard that in this book, the way that the black inmates, because of what they'd seen in the news, they thought Assata Shakur was some Hulk Hogan, out running amok. And, she's this really tiny person. But the same thing with the attack against black people in general, that they would go out and put all this nonsense. And I can't even say it's nonsense because it's dangerous. This is how people end up dying. Bobby Hutton, George Jackson. But they put out all this stuff in the newspaper saying that they, were talking about kill this white person and blah, blah, blah. Just things that they hadn't said, or just really trying to make them a mockery so people wouldn't support them, to just totally undermine what they were doing so that it would be justified when they go out to assassinate Fred Hampton, Mark Clark in Chicago. Who cares? Just another nigga dead. World is better off without him. Good riddance. That was the impact that the journalism would have. So really important to have their counter effort, getting out their own voice and to be able to talk about the things that were happening. Soledad Brother. Yeah, folks should check that out. Soledad Brother. We will get to the second audio. We are chapter 15. Very easy. Just go to chapter 15 and you're right on time. If you have other commentary, if you didn't get to speak, just make a note of what you wanted to share and we will make sure to get you in. Our narrator even shared a few notes. I'll make sure I get those in before we wrap up as well. Context of White Supremacy. The Autobiography of Assata Shakur. Chapter 15.
Chapter 15. A bundle of energy walked into the Black Panther Party office on 7th Avenue. If a light had been plugged into me, I'm sure I would have lit up half of Harlem. I was fired up and raring to go. When I joined the BPP, I was determined to give it everything I had. The officer of the day gave me a form to fill out. He couldn't find the second sheet, so I went back with him to look for it. He was searching through a file cabinet, which was in a state of anti-order. It was a complete mess. I offered to arrange it for him, and the brother consented. In a minute, I was knee-deep in paper, indexing and putting everything in alphabetical order. After everybody's security files were filed, I cut index markers out of the manila folder, thinking about how lax security was. I had just walked in off the street, and they let me go through all the files. I explained the new system to the brother, happy at least that the experience gained from all those boring office jobs was put to some revolutionary use. That same evening, I was on a bus to Philadelphia.
The party had called for a constitutional convention to write a new constitution that would guarantee the rights of the poor and oppressed and would be anti-racist and anti-fascist. We were attending the plenary session for the convention to be held later in D.C. This session was a definite up. Everybody's spirits were soaring. It took my breath away to see all those revolutionaries get up and tell it like it is. I was as happy as a dog in Boneville. My hotel room was a pool table in the basement of a church. I slept better than a princess on 20 mattresses. When I got back to New York, I was assigned to the medical cadre. Joan Bird was my immediate supervisor. She had been a nursing student and was one of the defendants in the New York Panther 21 case. She was out on $100,000 bail and busy working on the trial. She had been beaten, tortured, and hung upside down out of a police station window. She had big, soft eyes, nervous lips, and the face of someone who had been forced to grow up too soon. She reminded me of someone who had led a very sheltered life and then, all of a sudden, found herself in the cold, cruel world. She was sort of shy, and I felt sorry for her because she seemed to be under so much pressure. She took everything to heart. Nothing seemed to slide off her back. She worried about everything and everyone. She was facing 30 years in prison, so I had to do most of the medical cadre work, and she worried herself sick about that. The medical cadre was responsible for the health care of the Panthers. We made medical and dental appointments for them and taught them basic first aid so that they could help the people in emergencies. Periodically, we set up a table on the street corner and gave free TB tests or gave out information on sickle cell anemia. It was also my job to work with the black medical students and doctors who we were counting on to help us set up a free clinic in Harlem. The Panther Party had bought a brownstone on 127th Street, and as soon as it was renovated, we planned to open a free clinic there. Every week, all the medical cadre members from the Bronx, Brooklyn, Harlem, Jamaica, and Corona branches met at the Bronx Ministry of Information. On my first trip to the ministry, I carried a big stack of Panther newspapers. I was a lousy paper seller, and most of the time, I got some of my doing good friends to chip in and buy them. Then we'd give them away to the people. The head of the medical cadre was Alewa, and from the first moment, she gained my respect and admiration. She was serious about everything that concerned black people, but when it came to her health, she was a fanatic. She demanded that we take our job seriously, and woe be to the medical cadre who showed up at the weekly meeting with nothing on their progress reports. Alewa had a young daughter, but she nevertheless did the work of two people. I got expelled from the party, though, that first night after the medical cadre meeting. When I came out of my meeting, my stack of Panther papers was gone. I asked around, but no one had seen them. Finally, Robert Bay, the head of the whole East Coast branch of the party, said that he had seen them. "Where are they?" I asked. "I threw them away." "What do you mean you threw them away?" I asked, thinking it was some kind of joke. "I threw them away," he insisted. "Y'all know that y'all not supposed to leave papers out here on the desk. This will teach you to put papers up on the rack where they belong." I explained that it was my first time coming up to the ministry and that I had no way of knowing the procedure. "You should have asked," he replied arrogantly. "I threw them away and that's that." I was losing my patience. "Look, man, why don't you just give me my papers so that I can get out of here? I don't have time to stand here all night." "I told you I threw the papers away, and that's that." "Then you're either a liar or a fool," I shot back. He had made me mad, gone and stepped on my last nerve. Then he tried to get all bad, getting all up in my face, trying to defend his stupid arrogance. I was in no mood for fooling around. I cursed him out royally and walked out of the office. The next day, when I walked into the Harlem office, Bashir, the officer of the day, told me I would have to leave. "What do you mean leave?" I asked. He said that he was sorry, but Robert Bay had called him and told him that I was no longer in the party. I was burnt. I got the Bronx Ministry and told him to put Bay on the phone and proceeded to call him the unprincipled, arrogant idiot he was. In addition to being cowardly, he hadn't even told me to my face that I was expelled. I was so warm, I wasn't even surprised when he apologized and told me I was reinstated. I hate arrogance, whether it's white or purple or black. Some people let power go to their heads. They think that just because they have some kind of title in front of their name, you're supposed to bend over and kiss them on the ass. The only great people I have met have been modest and humble. You can't claim that you love people when you don't respect them, and you can't call for political unity unless you practice it in your relationships. And that doesn't happen out of nowhere. That's something that has got to be put into practice every day. The first day I was assigned to the breakfast program, I overslept. To get there on time, I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning. I was the picture of shame and remorse as I came plodding into the office. "Fancy to meet you here," the sister who I was supposed to be helping said. "So nice of you to come." Later on that evening, I criticized myself for being late. "That's all right, sister," the brother who was leading the meeting said. "You can do penance by working on the breakfast program for life." "For life?" I repeated. "Yep, you can show your sincerity to the hungry children of Harlem by working on the breakfast program for as long as you're in the party." I have always hated to get up in the morning, and the sheer idea of getting up every day at 4:30 made me groan. But I thought about the children I'd let down. Getting up early should be an easy thing for a revolutionary. I thought about those who had given their lives for our struggle and decided it wasn't so hard after all. Later, one of the sisters told me, "Don't worry, they'll just assign you to the breakfast program every day until you're used to it, and they can count on you to be disciplined." The same thing happened to me. I was glad it had happened to others because I felt like such a dumbbell. Gotta try harder, I told myself. Working on the breakfast program turned out to be an absolute delight. The work was so fulfilling. The Harlem branch had breakfast programs in 3 different churches, and I rotated among all 3. From the first day I saw those kids, my heart went out to them. They were such bright, open little people, each with his or her own personality. I spent the first 2 weeks or so just getting my cooking act together. One little girl came over to me and rapped me on the back. "There's something wrong with your pancakes." "What's wrong with them?" "They don't taste good." Making breakfast for a whole bunch of hungry kids in the morning is no easy task, especially when you don't know how many are coming or how much they're going to eat. And there was one little boy who I was convinced had a tapeworm. He put away so much food, it was unbelievable. One day I saw him stuff some food into his pockets. "Would you like some paper to wrap that in?" I asked him, tearing off a piece of foil. "I wasn't stealing." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Of course you weren't. Everything is free here, and you can take as much as you want. But don't you want to wrap it up so your pockets don't get all greasy?" "It's for my mother. We don't have no food and the stove is broke." "You can tell your mother that she can come down if she wants to, and you can take as much food home as you want to." A few of the other kids were looking at us. "That goes for everyone. If you want to take a sandwich or something with you, just let me know, and I'll give you some wrapping paper for it." After that, I would try to remember to ask if anybody wanted anything to go. Most of the kids were interested. "Give me an egg sandwich to go. I want 2 sausages to go." We rarely met the parents. When a new kid joined the program, the parents might drop by to check it out, but in general, they would only come to leave the kids or pick them up. The breakfast program in East Harlem was the poorest. In the middle of winter, some of the kids were without hats, gloves, scarves, and boots, and wore just some skimpy coats or jackets. When it was possible, we tried to hook them up with something from the free clothing drive. Only once in a while, when everything went smoothly and we were through early, did we get a chance to spend some time with the children. Usually we were in a rush, making sure they got out to school on time. Some of the Panthers wanted them to learn the 10-point program and platform. Others wanted to teach them Panther songs. I prefer talking to them, sitting down with them and exchanging ideas, so we just sort of combined these approaches. We were all dead set against cramming things in their heads or teaching them meaningless rote phrases. The children were so naturally curious, we had to take care not to let the food burn while we answered their questions. My closest friends in the party were Daruba, Kitawayo, and Jamal. They were all out on bail from the Panther 21 case. They came over to my house and we sat for hours talking politics, the party, North Korea, and what was happening on 116th Street. I learned more in one night than I learned in City College in a month. They had a hard time dealing with me, though. I can be as stubborn as 6 mules and will argue anyone down until I'm convinced one way or the other. Although I no longer hated white people and no longer saw all of them as the enemy, I was still not too fond of them. As far as I was concerned, it was the duty of black people to work in the black community, and it was the job of white people to go into the white community and organize white people. The brothers were in 100% agreement with that. We also agreed that it was necessary for black, white, Hispanic, Native American, and Oriental people to come together to fight. We disagreed on who and what I should study. Usually after a disagreement, they suggested that I read this or that, often Marx, Lenin, or Engels. I preferred Ho Chi Minh, Kim Il-sung, Che, or Fidel, but I ended up having to get into Marx and Lenin just to understand a lot of the speeches and stuff Huey Newton was putting out. It wasn't easy reading, but I was glad I did it. It opened up my horizons a hell of a lot. I didn't relate to them as the great white fathers or like some kind of gods like some white revolutionaries did. As far as I was concerned, they were two dudes who made contributions to revolutionary struggles too great to be ignored. The more I studied, the more critical I became of the political education program in the party. There were 3 different political education classes: classes for BPP cadre and PE classes for Panther leadership. In the community classes, Panthers explained the 10-point program and the general objectives and philosophy of the BPP, as well as various articles that appeared in the Black Panther newspaper. As far as I was concerned, these were the best PE classes the party ever gave. If the teachers were good, the classes were interesting and fun. With a few exceptions, PE classes for party members turned out to be just the opposite. We reviewed articles in the BPP paper, read passages from Mao's Red Book, and discussed certain speeches and articles by various party members. Most of the time, whoever was giving the class discussed whatever we were studying and explained it, but without giving the underlying issues or putting it into any historical context. The basic problem was not whether the teacher was good or bad. The basic problem stemmed from the fact that the BPP had no systematic approach to political education. They were reading the Red Book, but didn't know who Harriet Tubman, Marcus Garvey, and Nat Turner were. They talked about intercommunalism, but still really believed that the Civil War was fought to free the slaves. A whole lot of them barely understood any kind of history, Black, African, or otherwise. Huey Newton had written that politics was war without bloodshed, and that war was politics with bloodshed. To a lot of Panthers, however, struggle consisted of only 2 aspects: picking up the gun and serving the people. That was the main reason many party members, in my opinion, underestimated the need to unite with other Black organizations and to struggle around various community issues. A lot of the sisters and brothers had joined because they were sick and tired of the oppression they had been suffering. Most of them had never been in the struggle before. Quite a few joined thinking the party was going to issue them a gun and direct them to go out and shoot pigs. Most of these brothers and sisters had attended inferior schools, which either taught them lies or nothing at all. Education of every kind was sorely needed. Without an adequate education program, many Panthers fell into a Roboton bag. They repeated slogans and phrases without understanding their complete meaning, often resulting in dogmatic and short-sighted practices. For example, one day, an African brother who was working with one of the African liberation movements came into the office and gave us a beautiful calendar put out by one of the African liberation groups. It was bad. It had beautiful pictures of African freedom fighters and said something like, "International support for African liberation." The first thing I did was hang it up. When I came to the office the next day, the calendar was gone. When I asked what had happened to it, they said, "The calendar said international, and we're not internationalists, we're intercommunalists." I am convinced that a systematic program for political education, ranging from the simplest to the highest level, is imperative for any successful organization or movement for Black liberation in this country. The party has some of the most politically conscious sisters and brothers as members, but in some ways it failed to spread that consciousness to the cadre in general. I also thought it was a real shame that the BPP didn't teach the Panthers organizing and mobilizing techniques. Some members were natural geniuses at organizing people, but they were usually the busiest comrades with the most responsibility. Part of the problem was that the party had grown so fast that there wasn't a whole lot of time to come up with step-by-step approaches to things. The other part of the problem was that, almost from its inception, the BPP was under attack from the U.S. government. At first, I didn't feel the repression too deeply. I knew the party was under attack, but it felt like it wasn't so near, like it was lingering in the background. What made me maddest was media treatment of the BPP, which gave the impression that the party was racist and violent. And it worked. The pigs would burst into a Panther office, shoot first, and ask questions later. The press always reported that the police had uncovered a large arsenal of weapons. Later, when the arsenal turned out to be a few legally registered rifles and shotguns, the press never printed a word. The same thing goes on today. Nobody gets upset about white people having guns, but let a Black person have a gun and something criminal is going on. The only time white America is in favor of Black people having guns is when we are using them to do America's dirty work. They've got a lot of Black people so scared. They're even scared to think about owning a gun. But the way the tide of racism is rising in this country, Black people better be more scared to not have a gun than to have one. The Ku Klux Klan and all these other racists running around, Black people have got to be suicidal if they don't own and know how to operate a gun. If you don't own a gun now, you better rush out and buy one because in a few years, the way this country is moving, it might be against the law for Blacks to buy guns. One of the best things about struggling is the people you meet. Before I became involved, I never dreamed such beautiful people existed. Of course, there were some creeps, but I can say without the slightest hesitation that I have been blessed with meeting some of the kindest, most courageous, most principled, most informed, and intelligent people on the face of the earth. I owe a great deal to those who have helped me, loved me, taught me, and pulled my coat when I was moving in the wrong direction. If there is such a thing as luck, I've had an abundance of it, and the ones who have brought it to me are my friends and comrades. My wild, big-hearted friends, with their pretty ways and pretty thoughts, have given me more happiness than I will ever desire. There was never a time, no matter what horrible thing I was undergoing, when I felt completely alone. Maybe it's ironic, I don't know, but one thing I do know is that the Black liberation movement has done more for me than I will ever be able to do for it. Becoming Zaid's friend was something really important. After I joined the party, he would stop by my house every so often. We would listen to music and talk politics. I was forever teasing him about being part of the leadership. He was the Minister of Information. Since he was the only leader up at the Bronx Ministry, with the exception of Assata Shakur, I had any respect for. He would laugh at my Robert Bay jokes, but he never once said a disparaging word about any of the other comrades. I also respected him because he refused to become a part of the macho cult that was an official body into the BPP. He never voted on issues or took a position just to be one of the boys. When brothers made an unprincipled attack on sisters, Zaid refused to participate. Whenever we hooked up for a meeting at somebody's house, he was the first to volunteer to cook dinner, or if dinner was already cooked, the first to roll up his sleeves and wash the dishes. I knew this had to be especially hard for him because he was small and his masculinity was always being challenged in some way by the more backward, muscle-headed men in the party. Zaid always treated me and all of their sisters with respect. I enjoyed his friendship because he was one of those rare men completely capable of being friends with a woman without having designs on her. We communicated on such an intense, honest level that afterward I wondered if it had been real. And he was cultured. When you say cultured, most people think you're talking about the opera and Amy Vanderbilt's etiquette book. But that's not what I'm talking about. He was well-versed and well-educated about every aspect of Black life. He could not only recite Langston Hughes by heart and give a biographical rundown of Coltrane, Bessie Smith, or James Cleveland, but he could also sit down and have an intelligent conversation about dream books or Argo starch eaters. After a while, Zaid asked me to work with him on party projects. It was mostly dealing with white support groups who were involved in raising bail for the Panther 21 members still in jail. I hated it. At the time, I felt that anything below 110th Street was another country. All my activities were centered in Harlem, and I almost never left it. Doing defense committee work was definitely not up my alley. I think that one of the reasons Zaid insisted on bringing me to some of these events is that he knew how much I hated them. I was the perfect angry panther. I hated standing around while all these white people asked me to explain myself, my existence. I became a master of the one-line answer. What made you become a panther? Oppression. What do you think about Huey Newton? He's a right-on Black revolutionary leader. What do you think white people should be doing? Organizing other white people in their communities, supporting Black and Third World liberation struggles, and helping us to free the Panther 21. Once a guy asked if I was really going to off the pigs. Not tonight. I couldn't get over how personal some of those people tried to get, even though I'd never seen them before. One came over to me and asked if Zaid was my Panther husband. When I looked at her as if she was crazy for asking me a question like that, she said, giggling all over herself, I mean, is he your cat? Another woman came over and stuck her hands all in my hair. Oh, I just had to touch your hair. It's so kinky. Zaid would be steady trying to convince the defense groups to raise more money. He explained how important it was to have the Panther 21 out on the street, organizing and educating people about what was going on in America. Zaid was polite and understanding and patient. After he gave his little speech, he would turn to me and ask, What do you think about that, sister? Rapping in my best Panther cadence, I would say something like, Black people have been oppressed for 400 years. We are still being oppressed. The Panther 21 don't need any moral support. They need concrete support. They don't want to hear that you sympathize with them. They want to hear that you are willing and ready to help liberate them. When we were finished, a second donation would be given. Zaid was usually cool and poised at these functions, except once. We were at a meeting with the Computer People for Peace, a group that was helping to raise money to bail out Sundiata Acoli. Zaid said Sundiata should be the next Panther to be bailed out because his leadership qualities were sorely needed in the party. One guy kept interrupting him, implying that Zaid was pushing for Sundiata's release because they were friends, that he was being subjective and dealing from an emotional rather than a scientific, objective analysis. Zaid's face underwent a complete change. I could see that he was trying to control himself to keep from going off on this dude. What do you mean I'm being subjective? Don't you ever open your mouth to tell me I'm being subjective as long as you live. My brother, Lumumba, my own flesh and blood, has also been locked up for more than a year, and I haven't asked you for a dime to bail him out. Lumumba Shakur was one of the Panther 21. A complete hush came over the room. The computer people said they would do everything they could to raise money for Sundiata's bail, and that's what they did. The only thing was that once the $100,000 cash bail was raised, Pig Judge Murtaugh refused to release him or any of the others. We were furious and helpless. After a while, everything seemed strange to me. I was catching all these weird vibrations and sensations. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I could sense a whole lot of stuff going on. I felt like I was standing on top of a river with currents swirling down underneath the surface. All these strange things were starting to happen. I would go to the laundromat and find a black policeman there who said he wanted to join the party. Every once in a while, I'd turn around and see strange men following me. Even though I had no money to pay my telephone bill and had long stopped paying it, my telephone kept working, and after a while, I stopped receiving any bills. Politically, I was not at all happy with the direction of the party. Huey went on a nationwide tour advocating his new theory of intercommunality. The essence of the theory was that imperialism had reached such a degree that sovereign borders were no longer recognized, and that oppressed nations no longer existed, only oppressed communities, within and outside the U.S. The problem was that somebody had forgotten to tell these oppressed communities that they were no longer nations. Even worse, no one understood Huey's long speeches explaining intercommunalism. Huey Newton was not what you would call a good speaker. In fact, he had a kind of high-pitched, monotonous voice, and his rambling for 3 hours about the negation of the negation was sheer disaster. People walked out in droves. Instead of criticizing what was happening, most of the party members defended it. When I said that Huey needed speaking lessons, they jumped down my throat. And when Huey changed his title from defense minister to the ridiculous-sounding Supreme Commander, and then to the even more ridiculous Supreme Servant, damn near nobody said a word. That was one of the big problems in the party. Criticism and self-criticism were not encouraged, and the little that was given often was not taken seriously. Constructive criticism and self-criticism are extremely important for any revolutionary organization. Without them, people tend to drown in their mistakes, not learn from them. Because I was still a college student, I was often called on by the BPP to do student work. I didn't mind working with students to coordinate this or that, but I was deathly afraid of speaking in public. But they insisted I had to learn in order to be effective on campus. I used an old rickety tape recorder that was on its last legs. I decided to use it to practice public speaking. On and on I went, blah blah blah, into the microphone. The telephone rang. I put the mic down, turned off the recorder, and rushed to the phone. "Hello? JoAnne? Stop making tapes," the voice said. The phone clicked. I stood there with the receiver in my hand. I had to get out of here. I ran to get my coat. I needed some privacy to think. Every day at the office, things were getting stranger and stranger. Rumors that the pigs were going to attack the office were rampant. Convinced of the invasion, the leadership decided to secure the office. The big storefront window was removed and replaced by a wooden partition. Windows without glass were cut into wood, covered by little wooden doors. "What are all of those little holes for?" I asked. "To shoot out of," they told me. Piles of sandbags were brought into the office. I didn't believe that shit. Everybody was talking about defending the office. "Why do we have to defend the office?" I asked. They told me something about Executive Mandate Number 3. It said Panthers are supposed to defend the office against pig attacks. I was all in favor of self-defense, but I couldn't see giving my life up just to defend the office. "It's the principle of the thing," they told me. I didn't understand what principle they were talking about. One of the basic laws of people's struggle was to retreat when the enemy is strong and to attack when the enemy is weak. As far as I was concerned, defending the office was suicidal. The pigs had manpower, initiative, surprise, and gunpowder. We would just be sitting ducks. I felt that the party was dealing from an emotional rather than a rational basis. Just because you believe in self-defense doesn't mean you let yourself be sucked into defending yourself on the enemy's terms. One of the party's major weaknesses, I thought, was the failure to clearly identify between above-ground political struggle and underground, clandestine military struggle. An above-ground political organization can't wage guerrilla war any more than an underground army can do above-ground political work. Although the two must work together, they must have completely separate structures, and any link between the two must remain secret. Educating the people about the necessity for self-defense and for armed struggle was one thing, but maintaining a policy of defending party offices against insurmountable odds was another. Of course, if the police just came in and started shooting, defending yourself made sense. But the point is to try and prevent that from happening. One day, in the not-too-distant future, any black organization that is not based on bootlicking and tomming will be forced underground. And as fast as this country is moving to the fascist far right, black revolutionary organizations should start preparing for the inevitability. Fascist governments do not permit revolutionary or progressive opposition groups to exist, no matter how peaceful or nonviolent they are. It doesn't matter whether the fascist government simply outlaws the groups, like in Nazi Germany, or mounts a counterintelligence campaign to destroy opposition groups, like in the U.S. It was growing more and more impossible to get work done. Everything seemed to be in a continuous state of chaos. The party decided at one point to open a Saturday liberation school for children, and I was assigned to the project. I was really ecstatic about it, because I love working with children, and I was really tired of adults at the time. But, being my usual reserved self, I threw every bit of energy I had into the project. I collected books, materials, paints, photographs, children's black history stories, children's records, etc. 2 other comrades were assigned to the project. Everybody pitched in, and after a few weeks, we had a whole pile of children attending. Just as we got the program on its feet, I was called aside and taken into confidence. The party had information that the pigs were going to raid the office in about 2 weeks. If the pigs were going to attack the office, why would they bother to tell us? I asked. We have our sources, sister, I was told. Just like the pigs have their sources, we have ours. I was skeptical, but I figured they knew more about it than I did. In preparation for the coming attack, I was asked to prepare a child care place, a safe house for Panther children. It sounded kind of wild, but I agreed to it. In the back of my mind, I half thought they were testing me to see how I would respond in a crisis. I put the child care thing together. 2 weeks came and went, but there was no invasion. In addition, a lot of things were going on that I was not too happy about. Plans, priorities, and procedures changed daily, and most of the time the changes were ill-conceived. Everything had an arbitrary air to it, and I certainly did not have the feeling that we were waging a step-by-step analytical struggle. There was little internal conflict in either the Harlem branch or the New York chapter. For the most part, Panthers were a friendly, open group of people who really went out of their way to be kind and helpful, and in spite of all the pressure and hardships they had to deal with, managed to be principled and to fight as hard as they knew how for our people. We had a bit of a leadership problem with Robert Bay and Jolly, who were both from the West Coast. Bay's problem was that he was none too bright, and that he had an aggressive, even belligerent way of talking and dealing with people. Jolly's problem was that he was Robert Bay's shadow. Bay later became Huey Newton's bodyguard, a job for which he was much more suited. Cotton came to Harlem from California. Everybody loved him. He was everybody's main man. He had known Bunchy Carter, Lil Bobby Hutton, and Chief David Hilliard, and of course, the Rage, Eldridge Cleaver. Cotton had been sent to New York and put in charge of fixing up the brownstone the party had bought on 127th Street. According to the grapevine, Huey wanted to move BPP headquarters to New York, and Cotton was to prepare the security for the house. He used to mosey over to the Harlem office with a bottle of cheap pluck in his back pocket and tell war stories. He would sip his wine and talk about what had gone down on the coast. The first time I went over to inspect the 127th Street house, Cotton gave me a guided tour. He explained the whole futuristic security plan. He was going to hook up the security system so that if so much as a foot was put on the front steps of the building, an alarm would alert the security officer inside. If it was the pigs, huge floodlights would be turned on, blinding them. Thick metal doors would glide into place, and a lot of other fantastic things would happen that I don't remember. I kept my mouth shut because I knew absolutely nothing about security, but I silently wondered why he didn't put in stuff that was more conventional, like a closed-circuit TV. I had a special interest in the building since the ground floor and the basement were designed to be a free health clinic. At the time, the basement was a disaster, with no plumbing, no heat, no electricity, and a mountain load of bricks, powder, and debris. Cotton assured me that the basement would be fixed up within 6 months. Next, he showed me Huey's room. It was the only room in the house somewhat fixed up. He had put up wood paneling, there was a small table, and a single bed, which he carefully explained to me was made up in military style, ready at all times for the minister. I looked at him like he was crazy. Of all the things I could imagine Huey doing, sleeping in that freezing house on the Spartan bed was not one of them. Cotton talked about Huey with this eerie reverence that made me sick, and it sounded sure enough weird how Cotton talked about the minister's bed. I visited the house on 127th Street many times over the next few months. Hard as I tried, I could not find one shred of progress. I came to the conclusion that Cotton was a big mouth and a drunk, but everybody kept telling me how hard he was working, so I figured he was working on something secret they had obviously decided not to tell me about. During one of my trips to the house, Cotton's assistant told me he didn't feel well. I made an appointment with the doctor and called to tell him the time. A few days later, when I came to the office, everybody looked at me as if I had committed some crime against the people. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Cotton says the brother who works for him is sick and that you refuse to do anything for him." "What?" I was completely surprised. "That's not true." Cotton said that's what happened. Fired up mad, I tried to get Cotton on the phone, but it was out of order. It took me several days to get the thing straight, but finally the assistant confirmed that I had made the doctor's appointment for him, but that he had neglected to keep it, and had gone home instead. I tried to figure out why Cotton had made such a fuss. The only conclusion I could come to was that he was annoyed with me because I kept pushing him to get the clinic in order. Several years later, after the Freedom of Information Act was passed, it was revealed that Cotton had been working undercover for the police. Things seemed to go from bad to worse. Although there wasn't much dissension in the New York branch, there was beaucoup dissension and disunity on the national level. Every other weekend, somebody was going out to the West Coast to deal with contradictions. Everybody was uptight and miserable. And then, everything started to happen at once. First, there was an article stating that Huey was living in a $650 a month apartment in Oakland. The Harlem branch was shocked because, in those days, that was a whole lot of rent. And it contrasted sharply with the living conditions of the Panthers in New York. Panthers who owned little more than the clothes on their backs were out in the street in the freezing cold weather selling papers, with big pieces of cardboard in their shoes, and with flimsy jackets that did nothing to hold back the hawk. The party issued a statement that Huey was living in the apartment for security purposes, but a lot of Panthers were not at all convinced. I wanted to believe the security story, but it didn't fit my sense of logic. Then came a long series of expulsions, which proved to be the last straw. Many long-standing, loyal Panthers were being expelled by Huey. One of the first to go on Huey's private purge was Geronimo Elmer Pratt. Geronimo was widely respected, somewhat of a Panther folk hero. When I heard about it, the first thing I did was go to someone who would know and try to find out the real deal. Although paranoid and upset, the person broke down the story to me, just enough to let me know that the expulsion was probably unjust. I couldn't imagine Geronimo being an enemy of the people, any more than I could imagine myself being one. Then came the expulsions of the Panther 21, supposedly for writing an open letter to the weatherman that was somewhat critical of BPP policies. I had read the letter and could find nothing in it to merit such extreme action, especially since it might prove prejudicial to their ongoing trial. I was becoming more and more critical of what was going on in the party, but I loved it nevertheless and wanted to see it functioning on the right track. For the first time, I questioned whether I could continue to work within the party. Almost every project I was working on was frustrated and barely able to get off the ground. The Saturday Liberation School, the free health clinic, and a lot of the student work were all on hold. I felt frustrated and a bit demoralized. This party was a lot different from the Black Panther Party I had fallen in love with. Gone were the black berets and leather jackets. Because of police harassment, Panthers had been ordered not to wear the uniform, except for special occasions. Gone were the Panther marches, the Panther songs. Gone were the Free Huey, Free Bobby songs sung to the tune of Wade in the Water. Gone were the Big Panther buttons and Big Panther flags flapping in the wind.
Everything felt different. The easy, friendly openness had been replaced by fear and paranoia. The beautiful, revolutionary creativity I had loved so much was gone, and replaced by dogmatic stagnation. It was around this time that Zaid and I had our big falling out. I had made a big list of the criticisms of the party, along with a list of things I thought were positive, and a lot of suggestions I thought might correct some of the problems the party was facing. I called Zaid and told him I needed to talk to him. When he arrived, I bared my heart and soul to him. I must have talked for a good 2 or 3 hours, raising all of the political and tactical concerns I had. Zaid listened to everything I said without taking any position, one way or the other. Then he told me he would have to leave, and would talk to me another time. I was furious. I felt like he was acting in his role as leadership and using our friendship to gain information about how I thought, to gauge the level of dissension within the ranks. Throughout my days at the party, I have always been outspoken and blunt. Zaid and I had always been frank with each other, and I interpreted his silence as a declaration that he supported and defended policies I considered unprincipled and politically incorrect. After that, we didn't see or speak to each other for a long time. I had no way of knowing the thin tightrope he was walking or the pressure he was under. Zaid was acting as peacemaker between Huey and the Panther 21, furiously trying to get Huey to rescind his expulsion order. Zaid felt that to take any position in reference to problems within the party might jeopardize his role and result in dire consequences from the Panther 21. Setoayo and Daruba, who had not been expelled because they were out on bail and had not signed the letter, were also attempting to get the Panther 21 reinstated. They were under a lot of pressure from both sides. Huey wanted them to support the expulsion, and the expelled Panthers wanted them to criticize Huey's actions. Like Zaid, Set, and Daruba honestly believed they could straighten out the madness, and were it not for the FBI, they probably could have. Nobody back then had ever heard of the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, set up by the FBI. Nobody could possibly have known that the FBI had sent a phony letter to Eldridge Cleaver in Algiers, signed by the Panther 21, criticizing Huey Newton's leadership. No one could have known that the FBI had sent a letter to Huey's brother, saying the New York Panthers were plotting to kill him. No one could have known that the FBI's COINTELPRO was attempting to destroy the Black Panther Party in particular, and the Black Liberation Movement in general, using divide-and-conquer tactics. The FBI's COINTEL program consisted of turning members of organizations against each other, pitting one black organization against another. Huey ended up suspecting Set and Daruba from the party, branded them as enemies of the people, and caused them to go into hiding, in fear for their very lives. No one had the slightest idea that this whole scenario was carefully manipulated and orchestrated by the FBI. When they brought the Black Panther newspaper to the office, the one that branded Daruba, Set, and Set's wife, Connie Matthews Tabor, as enemies of the people, I refused to sell it, and attacked it as an outright lie. I had been so outspoken about my criticisms that I knew it was just a matter of time before I, too, would be expelled. Sick and disgusted, I decided it was time for me to leave the party. Most of the Panthers understood why I left, and I stayed on good terms with them. They would call me and ask if they could drop by or sleep over at my crib. Almost daily, I got a blow-by-blow description of what was going on in the party. The tension had increased even more. The differences between the New York cadre and the West Coast leadership was growing even wider. I tried to stress to the comrades what I saw to be the importance of everybody sitting down and resolving their differences. No such thing occurred. In fact, a group came to my house jumping for joy. They had split from the West Coast leadership. It really saddened me that they had not been able to sit down together and mend their differences. After I left the party, my life became more and more impossible. Everywhere I went, it seemed like I would turn around to find 2 detectives following behind me. I would look out my window, and there, in the middle of Harlem in front of my house, would be 2 white men sitting and reading the newspaper. I was scared to death to talk in my own house. When I wanted to say something that was not public information, I turned the record player up real loud so that the buggers would have a hard time hearing. It was so weird. I still hadn't received a telephone bill, and months had gone by since I'd paid the last one, yet the telephone was always working. Strange people visited my neighbors, asking questions. I hated to move from my apartment because the rent was so cheap. I was paying something like $65 a month, and if you could get used to the 5th floor walk-up, it wasn't at all bad. It was one of those rent-controlled buildings right across the street from the city college where I was enrolled.
I had no choice but to leave. It was impossible to live amid all those bugging devices. I decided to donate the apartment to the Panthers and look for somewhere else to live, and to spend some time with friends, passing a few days here and a few days there until I found another place. One day, as I was zipping up the avenue on my way home, a friend called me over. "What's up?" I asked. "Don't go home." "What do you mean, don't go home?" "Your place is crawling with pigs. They're waiting for you." I walked around for a little while, trying to get my head together. What could they do to me if I went home? I hadn't done anything. I thought about the Panther 21. They hadn't done anything either. Anyway, they can do anything they want. I thought about my crib. Maybe they had been taping my voice and hooking up pieces of conversation to make it seem like there was a conspiracy to do something. Maybe they would charge me with harboring a fugitive or with conspiracy to harbor a fugitive. Everybody said they were tailing me so tough because they thought I would lead them to Set, Derubo, or some other comrade that had been forced into hiding. Maybe they would try to interrogate me, beat me, and torture me until I signed some phony confession or something. I decided one thing right then and there. I definitely wasn't going home, and I definitely wasn't answering anybody's questions about anything. I thought of going to Evelyn's, but I figured that as soon as I showed, the pigs would be there waiting for me. I decided the best thing I could do was lay low until I found out what was going on and could come up with some decision. Chapter 16. My initial image of the underground was pure fantasy. When Zaya talked about the underground, I actually pictured people in some basement, passing through some hidden bookcase door and disappearing into thin air. I had pictured all kinds of elaborate I Spy kind of hookups, outrageous disguises, false panels, stuff right out of Mission Impossible. I was shocked when I ran into a brother I knew in a supermarket. I knew the pigs were looking for him. He had shaved all the hair off his face, but he looked almost the same. I had to catch myself to keep from calling out to him. I just kept walking, feeling that somehow seeing me would make him nervous. Even though I had always thought that someday I'd probably be involved in clandestine struggle, I had never given any serious thoughts to going underground. I had more or less thought of a clandestine struggle in terms of leading a double life. I thought the ideal way to struggle was to have a regular job or whatever as a front, and then go out at night or whenever and do what needed to be done, careful to leave no trails. I still think that is the best way, but you have to anticipate being discovered and be prepared for whatever might happen. At the end of the 60s or the beginning of the 70s, it seemed like people were going underground left and right. Every other week I heard about somebody disappearing. Police repression had come down so hard on the black movement that it seemed as if the entire black community was on the FBI's most wanted list. The repression had come down so fast that many people had no choice whatsoever to get organized. I was kind of in limbo, slipping back and forth between above and below. As far as I could tell, I was only wanted for questioning. I hadn't done anything, and I didn't feel that the situation was too grave. I had to be discreet and change some of my habits, but I felt relatively free to move around above ground and underground without too much of a problem. I had no intentions of answering anybody's questions, and so I'd figured I'd just lay low until the heat was over. There were so many things that needed to be done. Basically, I was working with the railroad support network stations, trying to find the basic necessities for people and trying to help them to get to where they needed to go. It was a job that required real caution and a lot of concentration on detail. Over a short period of time, I found that my powers of observation had increased many times over. I had to keep my eyes on everything that was going on, looking ahead and at the same time glancing over my shoulder. The work was so interesting and well suited to my restless, active temperament. But I found it kind of hard to change my way of relating to people. I had always been open and trusting, and I was finding it really hard to change. It took my almost getting killed for me to develop a more suspicious nature. I was running into quite a few people, some of whom I knew and others whom I didn't. Different collectives, members of different organizations, from different parts of the country. I was surprised at how disorganized many people were, and I was all for seeing them organize themselves in a much more disciplined manner. I was strained to understand some of the things I saw, but people were moving so fast it was hard to keep track of what they were doing. The whole situation was new to me, and I guess all of us were trying to make heads or tails out of it, trying to get a good grip on what was happening and where we fit into it. I had heard it on the radio, had seen some of the reports on TV. My reaction was wow. The tables were turning. As many black people as the New York Police Department murdered every year, somebody was finally paying them back. The media were filled with countless adjectives: senseless, brutal, vicious, deadly, bloody, etc. On May 19th, Malcolm X's birthday, 2 police had been machine gunned on Riverside Drive. I felt sorry for their families, sorry for their children, but I was relieved to see that somebody else besides black folks and Puerto Ricans at Chicanos were being shot at. I was sick and tired of us being the only victims, and I didn't care who knew it. As far as I was concerned, the police in the black communities were nothing but a foreign occupying army, beating, torturing, and murdering people at women without restraint. I despise violence, but I despise it even more when it's one-sided and used to oppress and repress poor people. But I was still in a state of shock. The shit was so real. I mean, it was happening. Somebody was doing what the rest of us merely had fantasies about. I had an early morning meeting. My friend went to the corner to pick up the papers and something to munch on. He came back, all excited. "Look at this, sister. I think you should look at this." "I don't want to look at anything right now. I want something to eat. What did you buy to eat?" "This is serious, sister. Will you come over and look at this?" "Man, I don't want to read no papers. I'm starving," I said. Nevertheless, I went over and picked up the papers. "Oh, shit. Oh, shit," was the only thing that would come out of my mouth. Hungrily, I read every word of the article. I stared down at my picture on the front page of the Daily News. The paper said I was wanted for questioning in relation to the machine gunning. Shit! I walked aimlessly around in circles. I couldn't believe it, but I was looking at it. "You've got to get out of here, sister," my friend said. "Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know, but we've got to get you out of here. Maybe you can go and hook up with the people." I knew that I had to hook up with some people in the underground, but this was no time to go around hunting for people. Strangely enough, I felt calm, and I wanted to stay that way. I asked my friend to go and get me a wig, and some other things to enable me to move around a bit. While he went to get things I needed, I went through my address book and made mental notes of the people who the pigs could easily trace me to. I had to stifle the desire to call my mother and tell her that, at least for the moment, I was relatively safe, and that I loved her. Once I got out into the street, I could feel the tension in my body. I walked down the street, searching for signs on people's faces. I walked a few blocks before I realized that not a soul in the world was paying me any mind. I heard some feet running behind me, and I swung around, only to find it was a bunch of children. I had planned to go to my girlfriend's house and decided I'd still head that way. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood, and I knew that it would be damn near impossible for anyone to trace me to her. Her life consisted almost completely of working and going to school at night. I was a little nervous when I got to her door. Maybe I was doing the wrong thing, getting her hooked into all of this. Maybe she would be angry at me for coming at all. I decided that I wouldn't stay. I would just stop by to explain to her why I was late and to tell her goodbye. She answered the door with a towel wrapped around her head. "What the hell took you so long?" How did I begin? A funny thing happened to me on the way to your house. "There's something I've got to tell you," I began. "I just stopped by to say goodbye. The police are looking for me. My picture is plastered all over the Daily News. I don't believe this is happening, but it is." I know, she told me. "What I want to know is what took you so long to get here." I stared at her, completely surprised. I didn't understand. If she knew what was happening, why was she expecting me? "I just dropped by for a minute to let you know what had happened, and to let you know that I'm okay." "Are you okay?" I told her that I was. "Where are you going?" I told her that I was going to try to hook up with some people I knew. "Where do you have to go? Do you have any money? Do you know how to contact these people? Do you need any help?" I told her that I had just found out what was happening, and that I was just going to have to play it by ear, slipping and sliding for a while until I could make contact. "Girl, are you crazy? You militants ain't got no sense. Would you take that shit off your head and sit down so I can talk to you?" She always referred to me and my comrades as "you militants." She was a militant too, but at the moment she was not active, not out on Front Street as she called it. "Do you have this address written down anywhere, or this phone number?" "No, nobody even knows who you are, or that we know each other." Luckily, I had never made a habit of writing too much down, and since things had gotten so hot, I had put most of the numbers I had for contacts in code. I knew all of my friends' numbers by heart, so that was no problem. I had never even called her from the 138th Street phone at my last place. I told her that, as far as I knew, there was no way I could be traced to her. Then relax, fool. It don't make no sense for you to be out there in the street moving around right now. You've got to relax and get your head together. Look, I told her, I don't want to impose on you. This is my thing, not yours, and I don't want to involve you in my stuff. Woman, will you please shut up? This ain't your thing. This is our thing. You didn't involve me in it already, and if I didn't want to be bothered, I wouldn't have opened my door. I'm your friend, and I trust you and love you. I'll hide you any old time. Where did you think you were going to hide out anyway? On the moon? I stared at her in amazement. I had never really known her. A real sister. Tough, critical, a bit too cynical, but a real stand-up woman. Here, she said, handing me a knife and some onions and potatoes. Make yourself useful. Even y'all militants got to eat. I just sat there grinning and peeling potatoes, talking and feeling really at home. It's early in the morning. I have to move. The move has got to be made with care since my picture has just been plastered all over the newspapers. Wanted posters of me are everywhere, and somebody had told me that the police have a photograph of me in the space over the glove compartments of their car. Carefully, I arrange my disguise. It has been designed not to stand out, something that will help me blend in with the other people who will be on the subway early in the morning. I stare at myself in the mirror, debating whether to look like a secretary or a maid. It's too early in the morning for secretaries. I decide to look like a poor black woman. Thick, ugly stockings run over black Oxfords, beat-up plastic pocketbook, hand-me-down-looking plaid jacket, and of course a Lord have mercy-looking wig. My puffy morning face, smudged with a dab of awkward-looking eyebrow pencil and lipstick, are perfect for the look. I walk down to the subway, stopping to buy a newspaper. I stand on the platform waiting for the train. I thumb the newspapers, making sure that no familiar photographs appear. I skim the headlines to find the usual assortment of right-wing half-lies, distortions, and scandal stories. The headlines, as usual, are offensive. Commies land in outer space. Cops nab light bulb bandit. Hubby ties knot with country gal. Finally, the train comes. I scan the cars as they pass, looking for the transit cop. Seeing none, I move toward the front of the train. I plop down in a vacant seat and immediately stick my head into the newspaper. Carefully, I look around to see who is riding in the car with me. In an instant, I'm reproaching myself for leaving too early in the morning. I have an eerie feeling that something is wrong, but I can't put my finger on it. The subway car has a Twilight Zone air to it. With the exception of a few white men who look like they are going to factory jobs, the rest are black women. One has on a nurse's uniform. Another looks like she is going to church, hat and all. And the rest of them look more or less like me. I keep staring at them, and it registers. Without one exception, every one of these sisters is wearing a wig. It feels so spooky. I am hiding my beautiful nappy hair under this wig and hating it. Hiding my stuff to save my life. I, who have had to give up my head wraps and my big beaded earrings, my dungaree jackets, my red, black, and green poncho, and my long African dresses in order to struggle on another level, look out from under my wig at these sisters. Maybe we are all running and hiding. Maybe we are all running from something, all living in a clandestine existence. Surely we are all being oppressed and persecuted. I imagine the headlines. Nigger woman nabbed for nappy hair. Afro girl has tangled hair. Militant mom bears all. It is really too much to comprehend. Such horrible things have been done to us. A whole generation of black women hiding out under dead white people's hair. I have the urge to cry, but I don't. It would draw attention. I keep from getting up until my stop comes. I pray and struggle for the day when we can all come out from under these wigs. Current events. I understand that I am slightly out of fashion. The in crowd wants no part of me. Someone said that I am 260s, black. Someone else told me I had failed to mellow. It is true I have not straightened back my hair, nor rediscovered Maybelline. It is also true that I still like African things, like statues and dresses and people.
And it is also true that struggle is foremost in my mind, and I still rap about discipline. My anger has not run away, and I still can't stand old El Dorado, and I still can't dig no 1-and-1, and I still don't dig no Rockefellers, and I call a pig, and a party to my thinking happens only once in a while. Anyway, I'm kind of happy being slightly out of style.
Context of White Supremacy. If you are interested in sharing observations, thoughts, feel free to chime in. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Our narrator, Mel, excellent job. She wrote in a few of her comments. A. We can skip A. B. I had secondhand thought from Mr. Fuller that came to mind during Chapter 14. When Assata is picking a white lawyer, it might apply in other situations where victims can pick their associates freely. This is the quote from Mr. Fuller. It depends on who can do the most to produce justice. There are white people who can see to it that you are not mistreated. From Mr. Fuller. C. While I'm not sure about urban guerrilla warfare, Assata using phrases like never let your enemy choose your enemy for you, and just because you believe in self-defense doesn't mean you let yourself be sucked into defending yourself on the enemy's terms, feel like important, logical statements. D. I did think it was great of her to learn first aid when she first joined the Black Panther Party. It would seem that she agrees with firearm training, ownership for self-defense. Some other likely useful skills to attain while ultimately attempting to produce justice might be swimming, unarmed combat, fixing electronics, and the basics of finance and law, a second language, but there are many others. That's from our narrator, Mel. All the folks who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. If you have comments, things you would like to share, feel free.
I was kind of waiting around to see if someone who hasn't commented had a chance. But am I able to go ahead?
Feel free.
Okay. Yeah. As Miss Shakur was stating, the Black Panther Party by that time was having big problems. I can recall reading, I believe Huey Newton was stating that the spread of the Black Panther Party was so fast that he, along with some of the others who were the founding membership out of Oakland, did not have an opportunity to give it adequate base because, and he stated that the young people were so infatuated with the black leather jackets, the berets, and the guns. This is one reason why they changed the name of the Black Panther Party for self-defense to just the Black Panther Party. And so that was part of what she was speaking about. And from my understanding, it is true that Huey, by the early 70s, was staked up in an apartment, high-rise apartment, I think in maybe in the Oakland area or something like that. Driving around full of bodyguards and whatever, that sort of thing. And there was a big issues between the I think they call it the Central Committee. I could be wrong, and the other chapters around the nation, and they were expelling a lot of people. And from my understanding, they also had meetings where they were beating people. So it just goes to show you about when Mr. Fuller was talking about four-wallism, organizing, that sort of thing, and under the system of racial white supremacy, on how kind of futile it is to do so under the system of racial white supremacy, as though the white supremacist is not aware of what you're doing. And they can break it up they can break up your whole organization in about 15 minutes. You know, it gives a lot of place to what Mr. Fuller is saying. With the advent of her picture being in the paper, it was also a practice. It was also a practice. They simply would just put charges on you. You know, put charges on you and leave it up to, now you're in a situation where you have to get captured or flight. And during that time, especially in the early 70s, there was a lot of planes, airline flights that were being hijacked, picked to places like Cuba or somewhere, that sort of thing. People were desperate and to try to hide out or get out of the country, that sort of thing. That was going on quite a bit. One of the basic ways that the FBI worked, they would get a non-white black person who had a record and have them to go from chapter to chapter for an excuse to raid, quote unquote, attack the office. And with the idea of man, starting a firefight. SWAT teams were formed because of the Black Panther Party. And that's all I have for temporary for right now, based on what I was hearing from Ms. Shakur. She was very accurate on a lot of things that she had to say. Thank you.
Other folks listening have comments they want to get in?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I thought one thing that was telling was when she discussed the African brother bringing in the calendar, and when she came back, it was taken down, and they basically told her that they were a community-centric organization. And I saw that as a kind of a short-sightedness to not internationalize their struggle, I would say. And I didn't really, I think she just gave a better perspective as far as that being the party stance. So basically the Black Panther Party itself was something that did not see the international scope of the system of white supremacy as far as they're addressing it. It was more a community-based situation, which I think contributed to its downfall in a way because of the fact that they didn't internationalize it. And then there was something else that she had said that also let me understand that, at least for her personally, and I think for the party itself, they didn't see whites as the problem as well. And it was on page 203. She says, one of the most important things the party did was to make really clear who the enemy was, not the white people, but the capitalistic, imperialistic oppressors. So she's not associating white people with being capitalistic, imperialistic oppressors because of what she was bearing witness to, like you said earlier about confusion. I think she was very confused at that particular point because of what was going on. And then also in reference to what I said about the international aspect of the Black Panther struggle, I think with the pressure that they were under from COINTELPRO and the FBI, they probably didn't even have the time to think about anything international at that point. And that's all I wanted to contribute.
Other folks who dialed in with a hand up have comments they want to get in?
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I've already spoken, so I don't know if I'm supposed to wait for somebody else or not. I have a comment about the internationalism. Well, at the same time, I recall, not just historically, but, just in terms of experience. At the same time, there were struggles, anti-colonial struggles going on in Africa, and the conflict, the issue that was kind of like always coming up for discussion, as we could see with Nkrumah and Fanon and others, and even DL, was being international, being anti-black. And I recall that as being a constant issue, because depending on how experienced or well-read a person might be, for example, like as has already been mentioned, a lot of grassroots people became involved with the Panthers and were somewhat enamored. And even though it was supposed to be mandatory that people do a lot of reading, it wasn't the forte of a lot of people. But on the contrary, when a lot of it grew so fast, a lot of the support was international, going to Cuba and Moscow and other places, and you didn't always have to. I think probably we got more restrictions today than we had then in terms of travel. That the conflict would be that if we had black nationalists and such in the U.S., and then we had the Africans on the continent and in the diaspora who were getting a lot of support from the Soviet Union and Cuba and other socialist, communist countries that, particularly like Cuba and South America, that have various quote-unquote races. And then you have blacks, they're just saying that we are nationalist race first. Understanding that conflict, that was kind of difficult for some people, such that you end up having Nkrumahism and Africans and blacks trying to say, well, we may be studying Marx and Lenin, but we do realize that there is some European, some racism in that. So there's kind of like a disconnect sometimes between those that were actually intellectual, but as a whole, as you look at the history, you can see that there's a great deal of internationalism involved, because if it were not for that, a lot of people would have not been able to leave the U.S. and go to those countries. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Right on. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, did you have comments you wanted to get in?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, at first, while listening to the book, it sounded a little bit like, when she was talking about the Black Panther Party, like she was airing dirty laundry, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to her, telling the truth, as it was, but anyone can sort of, come to the conclusion that with all the tactics that the FBI and the government is using, then a lot of disruption would be in the party. They were sending letters to each other, accusing each one of sleeping with the other one's wife and all this type of stuff. So I don't see how an organization with all that sabotage going on could survive anyway. And then you had the snitches, old Cotton, hanging around posing as a handyman and getting the information and then working as an informant for the FBI. Her telephone, and probably a lot of the members of the Panthers' telephone was bugged, and I thought it was, that story she told about not having to pay a telephone bill. Dick Gregory said the same thing. He said he had turned his phone off, and for years hadn't paid a bill, but it was still working. So that's how he knew that it was bugged. The breakfast program that she talked about was exercising black self-respect, because I think that it had become common knowledge at that time that the kids could not learn while they were hungry, and there was a lot of poverty. Kids did not have a proper breakfast, could not expect to sit still in the classroom and then learn the material. So I think they were on point there, and she had a chance to work in that area. That was very important. I think it helped in her maturity a lot. But she had a problem with the defendant in the office, and she said that one of the, I guess page 227, one of the basic laws of people struggling was to retreat when the enemy was strong and attack when the enemy was weak. And this idea of like barricading yourself in the office, defending the office, was not at all big with her. But then again, have to mention kudos for her aunt, who was there for her when she needed her the most, and it's worth noting. But I'll mute my line, give somebody else a chance if we wrap it up. Thanks for taking the call.
Did we miss anybody? Anybody else have a hand up, have comments they want to make sure they got in?
I'd just like to point out two things. I agree with Mr. Dimmy the first aid program was outstanding, and if they can get it going. And the school breakfast program was outstanding. The thing that I noticed is when one of the Panther 21 people were in jail and they finally raised $100,000 to get him out of the jail, the judge says, well, no, I changed my mind. We're not going to release him. He's not going to get any bail at all. He's not getting any bond at all, ever. And we had just said when we were going over the Allen Iverson clips, for the minor things that he did, they wouldn't give him any bond at all, the kind of thing that he's saying they only give people on death who commit capital crimes. They're the only ones who can't bond out before trial. And I'm thinking this may be a pattern. Black people do not get to post bail for a lot of things that are not capital crimes, but we may not know about it unless we're directly involved with that person. So it may be a standard thing that a lot of black people don't get to get out of jail and wait for their trial. They're not allowed that opportunity. I said I'm going to have to pay attention to that. And the other thing, when she was talking about the school breakfast program, the school breakfast program and the Head Start program go hand in hand in Texas, and they voted again not to give any money for the schools. Actually, let's just shut them off down if we can. I think I have to look that over. But they definitely gave money for more Head Start. I think the earlier they can get their hands on our children, the earlier they can do irreparable harm. Just irreparable harm to their little psyches. So in Texas, they don't pay for any education except let's get that Head Start program going with these good young white female teachers and these 4-year-old black kids. So that's it. That's all I have.
Folks have a hand up that have not been able to comment yet. Anybody that we missed? We get everybody? Just checking if you had something you want to make sure you get in. This would be the time to do so. Did we miss anybody? Okay. I'll assume everybody is all good. I guess number one, before I forget, to Karma's first point, there's a lot of data on that in terms of there being a differential that's always adverse for black people in terms of the amount of bond that's given. I even remember the case for Daryl Dedman. That's the little race soldier that killed James Craig Anderson in Mississippi in 2011, that he got a really low bond for like yelling white power as he, kills a black person on camera. He got like a super, super low bond at first, but there's a lot of research on that. And even if they do go ahead and, set up an amount for the black person to get bond, a lot of times because of the system of white supremacy, even if it's low, a lot of black people still can't afford it. So they still end up staying in greater confinement for an inordinate amount of time. That was even in the Ferguson DOJ report. But to the text, since the breakfast program and their medical efforts got mentioned, we did a broadcast, Alondra Nelson, Body and Soul. Go ahead and pull the whole book. Body and Soul, the Black Panther Party and the Fight Against Medical Discrimination. Black author Alondra Nelson. Excellent book that gives a lot of great detail about things the Black Panther Party were doing, more details about the breakfast program, more details about some of their medical programs that they were doing, even a chapter down in North Carolina because of racism. A lot of black people didn't have access to an ambulance and as a result died. And one of the North Carolina Black Panther Party chapters, that's what they did. They started an ambulance service for black people. And they just did a lot of work like that. And actually, when she was on the program, one of the things that she stressed was that she thinks it has been a deliberate act of racism that so few people know about the Black Panther Party's efforts at getting medical attention for black people and pioneering a lot of this work for black people, that people don't know about that. People don't know about their efforts to stop domestic abuse amongst black families and being, hey, you can call us if you're a black female and you're being victimized, being beaten. You can call us and we'll come deal with that. So you don't have to go to white people. They don't know about all of this stuff. All they know about is black leather jacket and a gun that she says she thinks that's been done deliberately to misconstrue some of the other really important things that they were doing, just trying to solve black people's problems. I counted the word arrogant 4 times in reference to the Black Panther Party, and I wasn't even, I didn't go in to do that. I think after she said it the 3rd time, I was like, oh, that's 3 arrogance. Then there was another, so 4 arrogance. In reference to, I guess, the quote-unquote airing of dirty laundry about the Black Panther Party, that's not unusual. It's been my experience. I think Assata Shakur, not Assata, Angela Davis, I've heard her give, her public scrutiny of the Black Panther Party and why she declined to be a member of it. I think that's well documented. As well as quite a few other folks have, stepped out to give their critiques of what was happening in the Bobby Seale himself. I've heard him give his critiques. There's a lot of that out scrutinizing what they did or didn't do in response to racism or, whatever. There's a lot of that. I appreciated a lot of what she said. I guess one thing that I would point out, I think I heard Kathleen Cleaver. She was married to Eldridge Cleaver, also both party members. Kathleen Cleaver, she said that we understood, right, that COINTELPRO, FBI, whatever, white people, that the system would be against us in some manner. We had no idea of the depth of what they were doing to attack us. I think that's pretty consistent, where we don't understand the magnitude of white pathology, white supremacy, racism. We consistently underestimate and minimize what they're doing to us and just the immensity of white terrorism. And I say that, like I said, so many books are coming back to me. Like I remember that I was reading around the time that I read this book. And another one was Geronimo Pratt, Last Man Standing. The Tragedy and Triumph of Geronimo Pratt. Outstanding book. Gives a lot of detail, and the split that she talks about where Huey P. Newton expels Geronimo Pratt. That right there, all white people's fault or white people's racist handiwork in instigating all of this conflict. And they don't find this out until like 20 years later. I think there's a documentary, All Power to the People, where Geronimo Pratt, he talks about he and Huey P. Newton, they ended up being in greater confinement at the same time. And so they were able to talk about everything that happened and figure out that, white people had set all of this up to begin with, which is, it's tragic on so many levels. To Geronimo Pratt, he ended up spending close to 30 years in prison. Johnny Cochran was his attorney for many years. And Huey P. Newton could have, if they had not been in conflict, Huey P. Newton could have given a lot of help to Geronimo Pratt that may have resulted in him not having to be incarcerated for nearly 3 decades. Like it's just white people. We talk about racist handiwork. That is a great illustration right there. And I would even, because I think one of the things that she said, and it was very lucid the way that she presented it about the importance of criticism, self-critique, so that you don't wallow in mistakes and errors. The caution that I have is what she said later about how good whites are at getting black people, setting black people up to critique and fault find with other black people to instigate conflict. Whites are so good at that sort of thing. I think if that logic is going to be applied, we should be really good about self-critique. That's one black person that you should have total liberty to critique and scrutinize and fault find with every day. And you should know all of the errors and flaws, or I'll take that back. You can't be always self-aware of every single error, but hey, you should be able to pick out a lot of errors and flaws if you're just being honest and scrutinizing yourself. That's one person that you can always do a lot of self-critique. As regards to other black people, I take the approach that if folks are interested in critique, they will request it. And I will stop there. That if folks have any other commentary they wanted to make sure they got in before we wrap things up.
Can I make another comment?
Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of like in the form of a question somewhat. I don't know to what extent blacks travel outside of the U.S. Then and now, but I just think that it's really critical to have a passport. It's right up there with knowing how to swim in second language and stuff. Because I will say, for myself, I was able to travel outside the country when right out of college or whatever. But I think that you get a different, maybe there's some other people on the line that might have some experience as well, the perspective as to whatever country you've been to. With Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, and even for myself, I will just say that the consciousness of what's going on in the United States seems to be almost greater outside of the United States than for those of us within it. I could be incorrect or whatever, but I was always surprised that, and to some extent, even, when I was younger, somewhat ashamed, you find that, even Europeans know a lot more than you would think that. I don't mean just in terms of racism or whatever, about, black culture than many of us may know. And that to me was shocking at the time, and somewhat embarrassing, to the extent that at the time maybe, I hadn't studied as much about us or known as much. So I think that might be true for a lot of us in terms of, since you talk about journalism, in terms of the information that we get or we don't get. So I just think that it's just really important that people can travel and get to know firsthand about what's going on in the world, other than just relying on newspapers or whatever we can get our hands on here. And I think that's really important. And the other thing that I don't know if people know, I didn't know at the time, is the newspaper that the Black Panthers put out, as well as Nation of Islam. The research says that at one point in time they were some of the largest dailies in the country. That says a lot, in terms of people picking it up and reading it. This wasn't just from them. This is from, I think I read that in the New York Times or whatever. That's really significant, But anyway, I just kind of want to say that it can be overwhelming to know that other people in the world really understand how oppressed we are in some respects more so than we do, Okay, I'll mute my line.
You can get your hands on a lot of those. To me, it's just more evidence of how thoroughly racists study their victims. But if you get a chance to go to like a major university that's close to you, college university, if you go down to their archives, a lot of times they will have some of those copies of Muhammad Speaks, the Nation of Islam's paper, and some of the Black Panther Party paper, and some of the other, a lot of the other, it's been my experience, black publications down through the years. The University of Washington, they have Negro Digest, which is awesome, and all these back issues of Black Scholar and Presence African, just a lot of stuff from all over the world, but definitely worth investigating. Just the last 60 seconds, anybody have anything quick they can get in 60 seconds before we wrap? Right on. I thought basically when she was saying how being under constant attack and the growth of the party being so fast that they didn't really get an opportunity to codify. She didn't use that word, but she said to really figure out the best way to be systemic about educating new members and how you go about explaining, informing people about what your specific program is, what your goals are, what your duties are, responsibilities are as a Black Panther member, and kind of their worldview, that they didn't get an opportunity to codify that. And I think that is consistent with regards to the system of white supremacy in terms of not allowing Black people the opportunity. You need quiet. You need free time. You need not to be stressed so that you can think efficiently, constructively, and really process what's happening to you. And on a global level, a national level, a local level, you really, it takes getting in kind of a safe spot. And racists do a phenomenal job of keeping us stressed, on the move, just constantly in a state of trauma, so that we really can't just calm our minds and think and evaluate and figure out the best possible way to go about doing things. They really do a great job. And even, I think Mr. Fuller talks about even destroying the information so that, you have people like Assata Shakur, Bobby Seale, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker. You have these folks come along, Chokwe Lumumba, and all of the information, the resources, everything that they learned, everything that they do a great job of just coming through and erasing all of that, so that you have to start from scratch. Every new generation of victims, you have to start from scratch. You don't even get an opportunity to really build on everything that's already been put down. They are doing a great job. We hopefully can work to change that immediately. We are going to be all done next week, wrapping up conclusion next Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. People have been suggesting new books. You can do so. I'll probably kind of collate all the suggestions that I've received, and folks can add and or vote. And we'll try and get our new book picked before we get to next Friday. But all done next week. Assata Shakur's autobiography. I hope it has been constructive. We will be back in about 24 hours. The compensatory call-in. Looking forward to reviewing everything that went down over the past week. Seemed like an active week on the plantation. There was a lot of like big stories that were directly around racism. We'll be able to hear that. Of course, workplace racism will be good to review and hear from everyone tomorrow evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Pacific. If you get confused, have questions, gripes, complaints, feel free. You can drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Hope it has been a constructive investment of your Friday evening, and per what we heard from Assata Shakur, be codified. If you're going to consume any intoxicants, don't make it easy for the race soldiers to come and nab you up and cause you a lot of unnecessary problems. Definitely want to be extra sober if you're going to be behind the wheel. I would say even a passenger. In fact, even if you're going to be a pedestrian, would be a good idea to be sober. Don't want to make it easy for Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, to go out and be race soldiers and terrorize black people. If you got to consume, also make sure you're not in the presence of white folks. And even be mindful of the other victims, black people that you might be around. It's too much evidence that there are a lot of unnecessary problems and conflict with the consumption of alcohol and intoxicants. I know it's summertime and people are enjoying themselves, but be codified. Be codified. With that, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.